silence preserves crimes older than memory. Every shattered relic behaves like forbidden testimony, whispering impossible timelines through abandoned sanctuaries. Civilizations erased without farewell still manipulate modern certainty, inviting obsession instead of answers. Each discovery fractures another comforting illusion, pulling curious minds toward revelations deliberately concealed until everything you believed collapses. At the foot of the Taurus Mountains in southeastern Palestine, where rolling hills meet fertile plains, an unassuming mound rises quietly from the landscape. Wind moves through dry grasses, carrying little hint that beneath the soil rests one of humanity's earliest experiments with settled life. At first glance, Çayönü appears almost ordinary, a low rise shaped by thousands of years of accumulated occupation. Yet, every layer of earth reveals a chapter from an age when the rules of civilization had not yet been written. Dating back to around 10,200 BC, Çayönü stands among the oldest known farming communities ever discovered. Its inhabitants lived during a remarkable period when groups of hunter-gatherers were gradually transforming into permanent villagers. Here, people cultivated crops, managed early domesticated animals, and constructed durable buildings long before cities, kingdoms, or written language emerged. The settlement evolved over centuries, with architects repeatedly experimenting with new building designs. Archaeologists have identified several distinct construction phases, from circular structures to carefully planned rectangular houses built upon stone foundations, suggesting that innovation itself had become part of daily life. Perhaps even more remarkable is the evidence for advanced craftsmanship. Excavations have uncovered polished stone tools, decorative objects, and some of the earliest known examples of copper being shaped into small ornaments. This was not true metal smelting, but rather the careful working of naturally occurring native copper. Even so, the discovery raises intriguing questions. Why were these early villagers drawn to a material that would not become central to human technology for thousands of years? Was its appeal purely aesthetic, or did it carry symbolic meaning now lost to time? Among the settlement's most puzzling discoveries is a structure often referred to as the Skull Building. Unlike ordinary homes, this building appears to have served a ceremonial purpose. Within it, researchers uncovered the remains of hundreds of individuals whose bones seem to have been deliberately collected and arranged over generations. Similar practices appear at several early Neolithic sites, leading many scholars to interpret them as forms of ancestor veneration or complex mortuary rituals. Yet, certainty remains elusive. Why preserve the dead in this manner instead of burying them beneath family homes, as was common elsewhere? What beliefs guided these careful rituals? The organization of the settlement also invites reflection. Streets, communal spaces, and specialized buildings suggest a society capable of remarkable cooperation without evidence of kings, palaces, or centralized political authority. How were decisions made? Did respected elders guide the community, or did entirely different systems of leadership exist before hierarchy became the dominant model? Some independent researchers have proposed more speculative interpretations. They wonder whether the unusual architecture reflects knowledge inherited from an even older tradition, one erased by rising seas and shifting climates at the end of the last ice age. Others see symbolic geometry within the settlement's evolving layout, suggesting connections between construction, astronomy, and seasonal cycles. Mainstream archaeology generally attributes these developments to gradual cultural evolution, supported by generations of experimentation and adaptation. Still, the absence of written records leaves room for interpretation. Çayönü continues to challenge assumptions about the origins of organized society. Each excavation reveals another fragment of a world balanced between survival and innovation, practicality and ceremony. The people who lived here transformed landscapes, reshaped traditions, and left behind questions that endure across 12 millennia. Even now, beneath layers of silent earth, one cannot help but wonder how many untold stories still remain hidden, waiting for a patient hand to uncover them. If places like Çayönü remind us that the earliest chapters of civilization remain incomplete, then the journey naturally continues eastward, where another silent mound rises from the plains of northern Syria. From a distance, Tel Beydar appears little more than a gentle hill, shaped by wind and centuries of forgotten footsteps. Yet, beneath its weathered surface lies the memory of an organized world that once pulsed with ambition, administration, and belief. Like so many ancient tells, it conceals countless generations within a single landscape, each settlement resting quietly upon the remains of those that came before. The surrounding countryside seems almost timeless. Wide horizons stretch toward the edge of the sky, interrupted only by fields, scattered shrubs, and the occasional ruin softened by erosion. It is difficult to imagine that nearly 5,000 years ago this was a thriving urban center connected to one of the earliest complex civilizations in Mesopotamia. Known in antiquity as Nabata, Tel Beydar flourished during the 3rd millennium BC, becoming an important settlement within the political and economic networks of northern Mesopotamia. Excavations have revealed carefully planned streets, substantial defensive walls, administrative buildings, temples, and residential quarters. Clay tablets discovered at the site record deliveries of grain, livestock, labor, and supplies, offering rare glimpses into the machinery of an early city. Far from being an isolated village, Tel Beydar appears to have functioned as an organized administrative center where officials tracked resources with remarkable precision. These tablets also reveal connections with the powerful city of Mehrgarh, believed to correspond with nearby Tel Brak. Together, these settlements formed part of a regional system whose influence reached across large portions of ancient Mesopotamia. Yet, despite the bureaucratic order preserved within these records, many aspects of daily life remain beyond recovery. Numbers survive. Names survive. Entire conversations, however, have vanished forever. The city's layout itself raises thoughtful questions. Why were certain buildings positioned with such deliberate symmetry? Were practical concerns alone responsible? Or did religious traditions influence the arrangement of streets and ceremonial spaces? Ancient urban planning often reflected both political authority and spiritual belief. But without complete records, many intentions remain open to interpretation. One particularly intriguing aspect of Tel Beydar is how suddenly its importance appears to have faded. Archaeologists generally point to shifting political alliances, environmental pressures, economic changes, and regional conflict as likely explanations for its gradual decline. Such transitions were common throughout the ancient Near East, where cities frequently rose and fell alongside changing trade routes and expanding kingdoms. Yet, alternative ideas continue to circulate among independent researchers. Some suggest that settlements like Tel Beydar may preserve evidence of forgotten systems of knowledge shared across distant regions long before conventional history assumes such communication was possible. Others wonder whether recurring patterns found in the architecture of early Mesopotamian cities reflect symbolic designs whose original meanings have been lost through time. These proposals remain speculative and are not accepted as established historical conclusions, but they illustrate how ancient ruins often invite questions extending beyond the available evidence. Even the thousands of clay tablets leave an unusual silence. Administrative records tell us how much barley was stored or which official supervised a shipment, but they reveal almost nothing about personal fears, private hopes, or the beliefs that shaped ordinary lives. What stories filled the streets after sunset? What ceremonies unfolded behind temple walls beyond the reach of written accounts? Standing atop Tel Beydar today, the wind crosses broken stones much as it did thousands of years ago. The city no longer echoes with merchants, priests, or scribes, yet traces of their presence remain patiently embedded within the earth. Every excavation answers familiar questions, while quietly uncovering deeper ones, leaving us to wonder whether the greatest secrets of Nabata are still resting beneath the next untouched layer of soil. As the dust of ancient Mesopotamian cities settles behind us, the trail of unanswered questions stretches far beyond the world's first urban landscapes. Across an ocean and thousands of kilometers away, another place waits in silence. There are no towering temples here, no clay tablets, and no monumental walls. Instead, the mystery survives within volcanic stone, preserved by the dry air of a remote cave that has watched human footsteps come and go for thousands of years. Fort Rock Cave lies in the high desert of what is now Oregon in the United States, tucked into the remains of an ancient volcanic formation, overlooking a landscape shaped by fire, water, and time. Today, the surrounding basin appears harsh and quiet, with sagebrush, windswept plains, and distant mountains fading into the horizon. Yet, during the closing chapters of the last ice age, this region looked remarkably different. Vast lakes covered much of the area, creating an environment that supported both wildlife and the small groups of people who learned to survive within it. The cave itself is modest, its entrance sheltered beneath weathered rock formed by volcanic eruptions that occurred long before humans ever arrived. Sunlight reaches only a short distance inside before fading into cool darkness. It is a place where every layer of dust seems capable of preserving a forgotten moment. That remarkable preservation transformed Fort Rock Cave into one of North America's most significant archaeological sites. During excavations in the 20th century, researchers uncovered dozens of woven sandals buried beneath layers of volcanic ash and sediment. Radiocarbon dating placed many of them at around 9000 BC, making them among the oldest known footwear ever discovered. Carefully woven from sagebrush bark, the sandals reveal an unexpected level of craftsmanship. Their makers understood local plants intimately, creating practical designs suited for long journeys across rugged terrain. The discovery challenged earlier assumptions about the first inhabitants of the region. These were not simply wandering bands leaving random traces behind. The sandals suggest planning, technical skill, and traditions passed carefully from one generation to another. Every woven fiber represents knowledge accumulated over countless seasons, yet the people themselves remain largely anonymous. The cave has yielded other clues as well, including animal bones, stone tools, plant remains, and evidence of repeated human occupation. Together, these discoveries paint a picture of resilience during a period of dramatic environmental change. As ancient lakes gradually disappeared and climates shifted, the people of Fort Rock Cave adapted rather than vanished. Still, important questions remain unanswered. Why was the cave revisited over such long stretches of time? Was it simply a reliable shelter during seasonal travel, or did it hold deeper cultural or spiritual significance? Caves have often occupied special places in human belief systems, serving as locations for rituals, burials, or symbolic encounters with forces beyond everyday life. At Fort Rock Cave, direct evidence for such practices remains limited, leaving interpretation cautious and incomplete. Some independent researchers have proposed broader possibilities. They suggest that sites like Fort Rock Cave may represent surviving fragments of traditions inherited from populations living near the end of the Ice Age, preserving knowledge that stretches further into the past than conventional timelines comfortably describe. Others speculate that the remarkable craftsmanship displayed in the woven sandals hints at sophisticated cultural networks connecting distant communities across Western North America. These ideas remain speculative, while mainstream archaeology continues to emphasize gradual cultural development supported by available evidence. Standing at the cave entrance today, the silence feels almost tangible. Wind sweeps across the volcanic basin much as it did thousands of years ago, carrying no memory of the people who once paused here after long journeys. Yet, beneath the dry earth, every preserved fiber and every discarded tool quietly reminds us that even the simplest objects can outlast entire civilizations. And perhaps somewhere within the darkness of Fort Rock Cave, another overlooked clue still waits, ready to reshape what we think we know about humanity's earliest paths across an ancient continent. From the quiet darkness of Fort Rock Cave, where woven sandals preserve the footsteps of distant ancestors, our journey returns to the ancient crossroads of Asia. Here, the mysteries no longer rest beneath volcanic stone, but within the ruins of a city that once flourished at the edge of an unforgiving desert. Time has stripped away its voices, yet its silence remains remarkably eloquent. Shahr-e Sukhteh, meaning the burnt city, rises from the windswept plains of southeastern Iran, near the ancient delta of the Helmand River. The landscape appears almost otherworldly. Endless stretches of dry earth shimmer beneath the sun, while distant mountains dissolve into heat and dust. It is difficult to imagine that this barren expanse once supported one of the largest and most sophisticated settlements of the Bronze Age. Yet, nearly 5,000 years ago, life flourished here, sustained by waterways that have long since shifted or disappeared. Established around 3200 BC, Shahr-e Sukhteh became a thriving urban center connected to vast trade networks stretching across Central Asia, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. Excavations have revealed broad streets, residential districts, workshops, cemeteries, and evidence of highly organized craftsmanship. Potters, jewelers, metalworkers, and merchants contributed to a city whose influence extended far beyond its walls. Rather than existing in isolation, it stood at the meeting point of cultures, exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies over remarkable distances. Among its discoveries are objects that seem surprisingly advanced for their age. Archaeologists uncovered an artificial eyeball buried with a woman, carefully crafted from lightweight material and decorated with delicate gold lines radiating across its surface. Nearby graves contained finely made surgical instruments and evidence suggesting that at least one individual survived a form of cranial surgery. Such finds reveal an unexpectedly sophisticated understanding of medicine and craftsmanship, challenging long-held assumptions about life during the Bronze Age. Another remarkable artifact appears almost playful. A painted ceramic vessel displays a sequence of images showing a wild goat reaching upward to feed from the branches of a tree. When the vessel is rotated, the images create the illusion of movement, resembling a primitive animation. Whether intended as entertainment, symbolism, or artistic experimentation remains uncertain, but it offers a rare glimpse into the creativity of people separated from us by nearly 5 millennia. Yet, despite its achievements, Shahr-e Sukhteh eventually declined. Archaeologists generally attribute its abandonment to environmental change, including shifting river systems, prolonged drought, and disruptions to regional trade. These explanations align with evidence gathered throughout the surrounding region, where changing climate repeatedly reshaped human settlement. Even so, the city's decline was gradual enough to leave room for lingering uncertainty. Questions continue to surround aspects of daily life here. Why did certain neighborhoods develop with such specialized functions? Were they organized by occupation, family, or social status? The enormous cemetery, containing thousands of burials, reveals differences in wealth and possessions. Yet, the social structure behind those distinctions remains only partially understood. Without written records explaining beliefs or customs, every interpretation remains tentative. More speculative ideas have naturally emerged. Some independent researchers wonder whether the city's advanced craftsmanship reflects forgotten exchanges with distant civilizations whose histories remain incomplete. Others suggest that unusual artifacts, including the artificial eye and evidence of surgery, point toward knowledge that spread through surprisingly sophisticated networks across ancient Eurasia. Mainstream archaeology explains these discoveries through gradual technological development and regional cultural interaction, interpretations supported by the available evidence. Nevertheless, the sophistication of the artifacts continues to inspire debate. Standing among the weathered ruins today, only scattered walls and fragments of mud brick remain visible above the desert floor. Wind drifts through abandoned streets where merchants once negotiated, artisans once worked, and families once gathered beneath an entirely different sky. The burnt city still offers remarkable answers about the ingenuity of the ancient world, but it also preserves countless silences. Perhaps beneath another layer of dust, another forgotten object is waiting, not to rewrite history entirely, but to remind us how much of it still lies beyond our reach. From the sun-scorched ruins of Shahr-e Sukhteh, where shifting rivers slowly erase the outlines of a once thriving city, our journey turns toward an entirely different landscape. Here, mystery does not emerge from desert silence but from dense tropical forest, where thick vegetation conceals monuments so vast that they almost disappear beneath the very earth they reshape. Some of history's greatest archaeological puzzles are hidden not because they are small, but because nature has patiently reclaimed them. Deep within southwestern Nigeria, beyond villages, winding footpaths, and towering hardwood trees, lies Sungbo's Eredo. Seen from above, it reveals itself only gradually, a colossal system of earthworks stretching for nearly 160 kilometers in an irregular loop. Massive banks of excavated soil rise beside deep ditches, forming one of the largest ancient man-made monuments in Africa. Yet, standing at ground level, much of it feels surprisingly modest. Trees grow from its embankments. Roots split ancient walls. Birds call through the canopy, while the scale of the construction remains almost impossible to grasp. For generations, local traditions have associated the earthwork with the legendary figure of Bilikisu Sungbo, a wealthy and respected noblewoman whose story has become woven into Yoruba oral history. According to long-standing tradition, she commissioned the enormous enclosure, and her burial place is believed by many to lie nearby. Over centuries, these traditions became deeply embedded within the cultural identity of the region. While historians generally distinguish between oral tradition and archaeological evidence, the persistence of these stories reflects the profound significance the monument has held for local communities across many generations. Scientific research suggests that Sungbo's Eredo was constructed sometime between approximately AD 800 and AD 1000, long before European contact with West Africa. The labor required would have been extraordinary. Millions of cubic meters of earth were excavated using tools far simpler than modern equipment. The sheer organization needed to coordinate such an undertaking hints at a highly structured society capable of mobilizing large populations toward a common purpose. Yet its true purpose remains one of archaeology's enduring questions. At first glance, the earthworks resemble defensive fortifications. Deep ditches and towering embankments could certainly have slowed approaching enemies. However, many researchers believe defense alone cannot fully explain the monument's unusual layout. In several areas, the walls traverse difficult terrain that would have offered little obvious military advantage. Instead, some archaeologists suggest the enclosure may have defined sacred territory, political boundaries, or zones of ceremonial importance. Others argue that it symbolized authority itself, a monumental declaration of identity visible across an entire landscape. The forest has preserved much while concealing even more. Thick vegetation limits excavation, and only portions of the immense earthwork have been studied in detail. Beneath centuries of accumulated soil may lie settlements, shrines, workshops, or gateways still untouched by archaeology. Every new survey adds pieces to the puzzle, but the overall picture remains incomplete. The sophistication of Sungbo's Eredo also challenges outdated assumptions about pre-colonial Africa. Rather than isolated communities, the archaeological evidence points toward organized societies capable of ambitious engineering, long-distance trade, and complex political systems. Similar earthworks found elsewhere in West Africa suggest that large-scale landscape modification may have been more widespread than once believed, though many sites remain understudied. As with many remarkable monuments, speculative theories have naturally followed. Some independent researchers propose that the extraordinary scale of Sungbo's Eredo reflects knowledge inherited from an even earlier civilization, whose traces have largely disappeared beneath tropical forests. Others wonder whether its winding course was deliberately aligned with astronomical events, seasonal cycles, or sacred features of the landscape in ways not yet fully understood. These possibilities remain speculative, while mainstream archaeology continues to favor explanations rooted in social organization, territorial management, ritual practice, and environmental adaptation. Even so, the monument's immense scale leaves room for continued investigation. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in what has been discovered, but in what remains invisible. Tropical environments are both generous and unforgiving to archaeology. Vegetation grows quickly, rivers alter their paths, and organic materials vanish into the soil. Entire communities can disappear with astonishing completeness, leaving behind only the earth itself as a record of their existence. Today, visitors walking along portions of Sungbo's Eredo often find themselves surrounded by silence broken only by insects, distant birds, and rustling leaves. It is difficult to imagine thousands of workers shaping these towering embankments without modern machinery, guided by plans that have long since vanished. The monument stretches onward through forests and fields, disappearing beyond the horizon as though following a purpose no longer remembered. And somewhere beneath those ancient layers of soil, hidden beneath roots that have grown for centuries, the unanswered story of who truly built Sungbo's Eredo and why they believed such an immense undertaking was necessary may still be waiting to emerge. As the forest slowly releases its hold on Sungbo's Eredo, another forgotten landscape begins to emerge farther south. Once again, the earth preserves the memory of a remarkable civilization, but this time the story is written not in towering embankments or hidden ditches, but in carefully balanced stone. Here, every wall appears silent, yet every stone seems deliberately placed, as though the builders intended their message to endure long after their voices disappeared. The Khami Ruins lie near present-day Bulawayo, in southwestern Zimbabwe, where broad savannas stretch toward rocky hills shaped by millions of years of erosion. During the dry season, golden grasses ripple beneath an endless sky, interrupted by clusters of granite outcrops that seem almost sculpted by nature itself. Rising among them are elegant terraces built from carefully stacked stone, their patterns flowing across the landscape with remarkable precision. There is no mortar binding these walls together. Instead, each stone supports another through careful placement, creating structures that have endured for centuries. From a distance, the ruins possess an unusual stillness. Birds circle above weathered platforms while scattered trees cast shifting shadows across passageways once filled with daily life. Unlike many ancient cities dominated by monumental temples or towering palaces, Khami presents a quieter kind of grandeur. Its beauty lies in proportion, craftsmanship, and subtle geometry rather than overwhelming scale. Khami rose to prominence around the 15th century AD, following the decline of Great Zimbabwe. Archaeological evidence indicates that it became the capital of the Kingdom of Butua, an influential state that controlled valuable trade routes linking southern Africa with the eastern coast of the continent. Through these networks, gold, ivory, cattle, and other goods moved between inland kingdoms and merchants connected to the Indian Ocean. Excavations have uncovered imported ceramics, glass beads, and objects originating from distant regions, demonstrating that Khami participated in an extensive commercial world reaching far beyond its immediate surroundings. Yet trade alone does not explain the remarkable planning visible throughout the site. The city's elite occupied elevated stone terraces, while surrounding areas accommodated broader communities engaged in farming, herding, metalworking, and commerce. These raised platforms were constructed through extraordinary engineering. Builders created retaining walls decorated with intricate patterns, including checkerboards, herringbone designs, and carefully arranged geometric motifs. Such decoration required considerable effort without providing any obvious structural advantage. Why devote so much labor to ornamenting walls that served practical purposes? Were these patterns expressions of status, symbols of political authority, or visual representations of beliefs no longer understood? Archaeologists generally interpret the layout as reflecting social organization, with architecture reinforcing distinctions between leadership and the wider population. This interpretation aligns with evidence from comparable settlements throughout the region. Even so, the deeper symbolic meaning of many architectural features remains uncertain. Stone often carried cultural significance beyond its physical function, and some spaces within Khami appear to have been reserved for activities extending beyond ordinary domestic life. Adding further intrigue is the absence of written records produced by the inhabitants themselves. The people who designed these terraces left behind no surviving texts explaining their intentions. Instead, historians reconstruct their world through architecture, artifacts, oral traditions, and accounts written by foreign visitors who encountered southern African kingdoms centuries later. While these sources provide valuable information, they cannot fully capture how Khami's residents understood their own society. Like many impressive archaeological sites, Khami has attracted speculative interpretations. During earlier colonial periods, some observers wrongly claimed that local African communities could not have constructed monuments of such sophistication, attributing them instead to distant civilizations with little supporting evidence. Modern archaeology has firmly rejected those claims. Extensive research demonstrates that Khami was built by the ancestors of local Shona-speaking societies, whose engineering skills, political organization, and artistic traditions fully account for the site's development. Even with that important question settled, other mysteries remain. Some independent researchers suggest that the placement of terraces and ceremonial spaces may reflect astronomical observations or sacred alignments embedded within the surrounding landscape. Others wonder whether the repeating geometric designs preserve symbolic meanings inherited across generations, but now lost to history. These ideas remain speculative, while mainstream scholarship continues to emphasize cultural, social, and environmental explanations supported by archaeological evidence. Excavations also reveal evidence of a gradual decline rather than sudden destruction. Environmental pressures, shifting trade routes, political changes, and regional competition likely contributed to Khami's eventual abandonment during the 17th century. Nature slowly reclaimed its streets, while generations passed without fully remembering the rhythms of life once sustained within these stone walls. Today, sunlight still falls across terraces built with astonishing patience centuries ago. Lizards move between carefully balanced stones. Wind passes through empty courtyards where rulers, artisans, traders, and families once shaped the course of a thriving kingdom. The silence feels neither empty nor complete. Instead, it carries the quiet weight of unanswered questions. Every precisely placed stone suggests intention. Every decorated wall hints at forgotten meaning, and every unexplored corner invites the same enduring thought. How much of Khami's true story still rests hidden beneath the soil, waiting for another careful discovery to bring its forgotten world a little closer to view? As the silent stone terraces of Khami fade into memory, another monument emerges at the very edge of the known world. This time, the mystery does not rest beneath layers of earth or within forgotten cities reclaimed by forests. Instead, it rises from the Atlantic Ocean itself, where towering cliffs stand against relentless waves, and isolation becomes part of the story. Some places seem designed not merely to be inhabited, but to test the limits of human endurance. Far off the southwestern coast of Ireland, two jagged islands break through the sea like the worn peaks of an ancient mountain range submerged long ago. The larger of them, Skellig Michael, rises dramatically from the water, its dark rock walls climbing nearly vertical towards the sky. From a distance, it appears almost inaccessible. Atlantic swells crash endlessly against its base. Seabirds circle overhead in vast numbers, and mist often wraps the island in shifting veils that blur the line between sea and sky. It is a landscape where silence is interrupted only by wind, waves, and the cries of nesting birds. Long before modern boats carried visitors across these waters, reaching Skellig Michael demanded extraordinary determination. Even today, landing depends entirely on calm seas, a rare gift in this part of the Atlantic. Climbing the island requires ascending hundreds of steep stone steps carved directly into the mountainside, many without handrails, clinging to cliffs that plunge toward the ocean below. Every step reinforces a simple question: why would anyone choose to live here? Near the summit stands one of Europe's most extraordinary early medieval monastic settlements. Built sometime between the 6th and 8th centuries A.D., the monastery consists of small, stone beehive-shaped huts, simple oratories, terraces, and protective walls constructed without mortar. Using carefully balanced dry stone techniques, unknown builders created structures capable of surviving more than 1,000 years of fierce Atlantic weather. Their craftsmanship remains astonishing. Despite centuries of storms, many of the buildings still stand remarkably intact. Historical records suggest that Christian monks sought out isolated places where they could devote themselves entirely to prayer, contemplation, and spiritual discipline. Skellig Michael represented the ultimate expression of that ideal. Life here was demanding beyond imagination. Fresh water had to be carefully collected from rainfall. Food was limited to what could be cultivated on narrow terraces, gathered from seabirds, or brought by boat whenever weather allowed. Winters would have been especially unforgiving, with powerful winds sweeping across exposed cliffs for days without relief. Yet archaeology reveals that this harsh existence continued for generations. The monastery was not the refuge of a single hermit, but a functioning religious community whose members accepted extraordinary hardship as part of their devotion. Still, several mysteries endure. Very little is known about the earliest phase of construction. No surviving contemporary document describes how the first builders transported materials up the island's steep slopes or organized such ambitious work in so hostile an environment. Every stone had to be placed by hand, often on narrow ledges overlooking sheer drops into the sea. The achievement remains impressive even by modern standards. The island's location has inspired further speculation. Some historians note that remote islands often held spiritual significance long before Christianity arrived in Ireland. Although direct archaeological evidence for substantial pre-Christian occupation on Skellig Michael remains limited, some researchers wonder whether the island already possessed sacred associations that later Christian communities adopted and transformed. Similar patterns have occurred elsewhere in Europe, where new religious traditions established themselves upon landscapes already considered spiritually important. Others have questioned whether certain features of the settlement reflect astronomical observation. The alignment of pathways, terraces, and viewpoints has encouraged suggestions that seasonal events or celestial movements may have influenced aspects of the monastery's design. These proposals remain speculative, and mainstream scholarship generally interprets the layout through practical needs shaped by the island's rugged terrain. Nevertheless, the relationship between architecture, landscape, and symbolism continues to invite careful discussion. Legends surrounding the island add another layer of intrigue. Medieval stories describe Skellig Michael as a place where the boundary between the earthly and the divine seemed unusually thin. Pilgrims regarded the journey itself as an act of profound spiritual commitment, while local folklore gradually surrounded the island with tales of miracles, visions, and unseen presences carried on the Atlantic wind. Such traditions cannot be verified through archaeology, yet they reveal how powerfully the island has stirred the human imagination across centuries. Today, the stone huts remain perched high above the sea exactly where generations of monks once greeted each dawn. Clouds drift across the cliffs, waves continue their endless assault below, and seabirds return each season as though nothing has changed. The monastery survives not simply as an archaeological site, but as a question carved into stone. What inspired ordinary people to abandon the comforts of the mainland for a life balanced between sky and ocean? And as the Atlantic slowly weathers each ancient step, one cannot help but wonder whether Skellig Michael still holds quiet secrets that neither history nor the sea has yet surrendered. Leaving behind the windswept cliffs of Skellig Michael, where isolation became a path toward spiritual devotion, our journey turns once more to a landscape where the earliest foundations of civilization quietly emerged. This time, the mystery is not perched above a restless ocean, but spread across a broad, sunlit plain at the gateway between mountains and river valleys. Here, beneath layers of compacted earth, lie the traces of a community that may have helped shape the future long before history began recording names. Mehrgarh rests on the Kachi Plain in present-day Balochistan, Pakistan, near the Bolan Pass, one of the great natural corridors connecting the Iranian Plateau with the Indus Valley. The surrounding landscape is striking in its contrasts. Rugged mountains rise along the horizon, while open plains stretch outward beneath an immense sky. Seasonal rivers carve temporary paths through the land before fading into dry channels. At first glance, the site appears little more than a series of low mounds softened by time. Yet, beneath those quiet elevations lies one of the most important archaeological discoveries in South Asia. Dating back to around 7000 BC, Mehrgarh ranks among the earliest known farming settlements anywhere in the world. Long before the great cities of the Indus civilization appeared, generations of people here were already experimenting with agriculture, animal domestication, architecture, craftsmanship, and communal life. The site remained occupied for thousands of years, preserving an unusually long record of gradual cultural development. Rather than emerging suddenly, civilization here appears to have evolved through countless small innovations accumulated across centuries. The earliest inhabitants built simple mud brick houses divided into carefully arranged rooms, suggesting an organized approach to domestic life. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence for the cultivation of barley and wheat, along with the management of sheep, goats, and cattle. These discoveries reveal a society steadily shifting away from seasonal hunting and gathering toward permanent settlement. Yet the transition was neither abrupt nor uniform. For many generations, older traditions continued alongside new ways of living, creating a fascinating picture of adaptation rather than revolution. As excavations expanded, Mehrgarh revealed something even more remarkable. Its cemeteries contain carefully arranged burials accompanied by ornaments, baskets, tools, and decorative objects crafted from shell, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and other materials transported from distant regions. These grave goods suggest that extensive exchange networks already connected communities separated by hundreds of kilometers. Even at this early stage, ideas and materials moved across landscapes far more actively than once imagined. The craftsmanship displayed throughout the settlement is equally impressive. Pottery became increasingly refined over time, while figurines crafted from clay often depict human forms, particularly women adorned with elaborate hairstyles and ornaments. Their exact purpose remains uncertain. Some scholars interpret them as symbols associated with fertility or household rituals. Others caution that assigning religious meaning without written evidence remains speculative. They may have served entirely different purposes now lost to history. Among the most extraordinary discoveries at Mehrgarh is evidence for surprisingly advanced dental treatment. Several human teeth recovered from burials show precisely drilled cavities created using stone tools nearly 9,000 years ago. Microscopic analysis indicates that these procedures were performed while the individuals were still alive. The findings represent some of the earliest known examples of dental intervention anywhere in the archaeological record. This discovery raises compelling questions. How did such specialized knowledge develop within an early farming community? Was it the work of highly skilled craftspeople whose experience with drilling beads translated into medical practice? Or did generations of careful experimentation gradually produce techniques that later disappeared before reappearing elsewhere? Archaeologists generally favor practical explanations grounded in accumulated craftsmanship. Yet, the sophistication of the procedures continues to inspire admiration. The long occupation of Mehrgarh also offers valuable insight into cultural continuity. Over thousands of years, architecture changed, technologies improved, and artistic styles evolved, but many traditions persisted. Rather than collapsing under environmental or social pressures, the settlement adapted repeatedly to changing conditions. Eventually, around 2600 BC, activity at Mehrgarh declined as populations increasingly shifted toward the growing urban centers of the Indus civilization. Whether this transition occurred gradually through migration, economic opportunity, environmental change, or a combination of factors remains an active area of research. Despite decades of excavation, many questions remain unanswered. No written language has been recovered from the earliest phases of the site, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct entire lifeways from architecture, tools, burials, and fragments of everyday objects. We know what people built, what they cultivated, and some of what they traded. We know far less about their stories, beliefs, songs, or explanations for the world around them. As with many ancient settlements that seem unexpectedly advanced, Mehrgarh has attracted more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers argue that the site's early achievements indicate the survival of knowledge inherited from an even older and largely forgotten tradition dating to the end of the last ice age. Others suggest that its technological innovations spread farther and earlier than conventional chronologies fully recognize, influencing distant cultures through networks that archaeology has only begun to uncover. These proposals remain speculative, while mainstream scholarship explains Mehrgarh's development through long-term local innovation, environmental adaptation, and regional interaction supported by extensive archaeological evidence. Yet, even mainstream research acknowledges that Mehrgarh continues to reshape our understanding of humanity's earliest settled communities. Every excavation uncovers another detail that challenges older assumptions about when complex skills first emerged. Agriculture, craftsmanship, medicine, long-distance exchange, and organized village life all appear here far earlier than many once believed possible. Today, the quiet mounds of Mehrgarh seem almost indistinguishable from the surrounding plain. Wind sweeps across ancient mud brick foundations, carrying dust over rooms where families once gathered nearly 9,000 years ago. Nothing in the landscape announces its importance. There are no towering monuments or dramatic walls rising above the horizon. Instead, the mystery lies beneath the surface, preserved in countless fragments waiting to be understood. Every buried floor, every forgotten grave, and every carefully shaped artifact whispers the same enduring possibility, that humanity's earliest chapters remain incomplete, and somewhere beneath the silent earth of Mehrgarh, another discovery may still be waiting to rewrite what we think we know about the beginning of civilization. From the ancient fields of Mehrgarh, where the earliest farming communities quietly transformed the course of human history, our journey now crosses continents once again. This time, the mystery rises from the high desert of North America, where vast skies stretch above sandstone mesas and deep canyons. Here, memory is preserved not in written records, but in carefully placed stone, sacred geometry, and traditions that continue to echo through indigenous communities. Among these enduring landscapes stands one of the most enigmatic ceremonial structures ever built in the ancient Southwest. Casa Rinconada lies within Chaco Culture National Historical Park in present-day New Mexico, surrounded by broad valleys, rugged cliffs, and weathered rock formations shaped by millions of years of wind and water. The desert appears almost motionless. Sagebrush clings to dry soil, ravens glide across immense blue skies, and sunlight slowly shifts across sandstone walls throughout the day. At first glance, the structure seems modest against the scale of the landscape. Yet, as one approaches, its extraordinary design begins to reveal itself. Unlike the towering buildings of later civilizations, Casa Rinconada is built partially below ground level. It is the largest known great kiva in Chaco Canyon, measuring nearly 20 meters in diameter. Massive stone walls form a nearly perfect circle, enclosing a ceremonial chamber whose purpose continues to invite careful study. Descending into the structure, visitors leave behind the brightness of the desert and enter a space defined by silence, symmetry, and deliberate architectural precision. Casa Rinconada was constructed sometime during the 11th century A.D., when Chaco Canyon stood at the heart of one of the most influential cultural centers in the ancient American Southwest. Across the canyon, remarkable great houses, roads, reservoirs, and ceremonial buildings formed an interconnected landscape unlike anything previously seen in the region. Rather than a single city in the familiar sense, Chaco appears to have functioned as a network of communities linked through ceremony, exchange, engineering, and shared belief. Within this remarkable system, Casa Rinconada occupies a distinctive place. Archaeologists generally identify it as a great kiva, a large ceremonial structure used for communal gatherings, rituals, and important social events. Similar kivas exist throughout Puebloan history, and many descendant indigenous communities continue to regard such spaces as deeply significant. While the exact ceremonies performed here remain unknown, the architecture itself offers valuable clues. The interior contains carefully constructed benches, niches built into the walls, masonry vaults, and a central fire pit. One of its most intriguing features is the sipapu, a small opening in the floor traditionally understood in Pueblo belief as symbolizing the place of emergence, connecting the present world with ancestral origins. The presence of this feature strongly suggests ceremonial functions rooted in enduring spiritual traditions. Yet, the structure raises questions that remain difficult to answer fully. The precision of its construction is remarkable. Its circular walls display careful geometry, while entrances and interior elements appear intentionally arranged rather than randomly positioned. One doorway aligns with the rising sun during certain times of the year, allowing sunlight to enter the chamber in ways that many researchers believe held ceremonial significance. Whether these alignments served practical calendrical purposes, reinforced seasonal rituals, or expressed broader cosmological beliefs remains an area of continuing research. Beyond Casa Rinconada itself, Chaco Canyon presents an even larger mystery. Hundreds of kilometers of engineered roads extend outward from the canyon across mesas, cliffs, and open desert. Some roads connect to settlements, while others appear to lead toward isolated locations with no obvious destination. Mainstream archaeology generally interprets these road systems as serving multiple purposes, including trade, communication, ceremonial processions, and political integration among dispersed communities. Yet, certain segments remain difficult to explain solely through practical transportation. Casa Rinconada may have stood at the center of gatherings that drew visitors from distant settlements. Excavations suggest that Chaco hosted periodic ceremonial events, bringing together communities spread across the wider region. Large quantities of imported materials, including macaws from tropical regions, marine shells from distant coastlines, copper bells from Mesoamerica, and finely crafted turquoise ornaments, demonstrate that these societies maintained surprisingly extensive exchange networks. Such discoveries challenge outdated assumptions about the isolation of ancient North American cultures. Even so, many aspects of daily life remain elusive. There are no surviving written records explaining why ceremonies were performed, how religious authority functioned, or what participants believed as they gathered inside the Great Kiva beneath flickering firelight. The architecture preserves only the setting, leaving the voices themselves beyond recovery. Like many extraordinary archaeological sites, Casa Rinconada has inspired speculative interpretations alongside mainstream scholarship. Some independent researchers propose that its careful geometry reflects sophisticated astronomical knowledge extending far beyond seasonal observation. They point to possible alignments involving lunar cycles, solar events, and surrounding landmarks, suggesting that the structure functioned as part of an elaborate ceremonial observatory. Archaeologists acknowledge that astronomy likely played an important role within Chacuan society, particularly in tracking seasonal changes essential for agriculture, but they continue to debate the extent to which every architectural feature was intentionally aligned with celestial events. Others have suggested that Chaco Canyon served as the ceremonial center of an extensive spiritual landscape, whose full boundaries remain undiscovered. Rather than functioning primarily as a densely populated city, they argue it may have operated as a pilgrimage destination, where people gathered during specific seasons before returning to distant communities. This interpretation has gained interest among some researchers and aligns with evidence indicating periodic large-scale gatherings, though many details remain uncertain. Perhaps the greatest mystery concerns the eventual transformation of Chaco itself. By the late 12th century AD, large-scale construction ceased, and many major buildings were gradually abandoned. Archaeologists generally attribute these changes to prolonged drought, shifting environmental conditions, social reorganization, and changing political relationships across the region. Tree ring studies provide strong evidence that severe drought affected agricultural productivity during this period, making long-term occupation increasingly difficult. Yet, environmental stress alone may not explain every aspect of the transition. Cultural decisions, evolving religious practices, and changing networks of influence likely played important roles as well. Standing inside Casa Rinconada today, the silence feels unusually complete. Sunlight moves slowly across ancient stone, tracing patterns that have repeated through countless seasons. The surrounding desert remains vast, its stillness interrupted only by wind moving across distant mesas. Every carefully placed block, every shadowed niche, and every worn step suggests intention beyond simple construction. Yet the ceremonies once performed here remain hidden behind centuries without written testimony. Perhaps that silence is itself part of the monument's enduring power. Casa Rinconada does not offer easy answers. Instead, it invites careful observation, patient reflection, and an appreciation for how much can be expressed without words. Beneath the immense desert sky, surrounded by landscapes that have witnessed generations rise and fade, the great kiva continues to hold its quiet place at the center of an unfinished story. And somewhere within the balance between stone, sunlight, and memory, another piece of that story may still be waiting for those willing to look just a little more closely. From the circular silence of Casa Rinconada, where stone, sunlight, and ceremony still seem to converse across the centuries, our path follows the ancient roads that once crossed the high desert of the American Southwest. Beyond the canyon walls, the landscape opens into a vast plateau shaped by volcanoes, wind, and time. Here, another settlement rises from the red earth, not hidden beneath forests or buried beneath drifting sands, but standing openly beneath an endless sky. Even after centuries of abandonment, it still feels as though its inhabitants have only just stepped away. Wupatki stands within the painted desert region of northern Arizona, where crimson sandstone walls rise above broad grasslands framed by distant volcanic peaks. The land appears both harsh and welcoming. Summer heat shimmers across black lava fields, while winter brings cold winds sweeping across open plains. Rain is scarce, yet life persists in subtle ways. Wildflowers briefly brighten the desert after seasonal storms, and small springs hidden among the rocks have sustained travelers for generations. Against this dramatic backdrop, the stone pueblo of Wupatki emerges with remarkable confidence, its weathered walls blending naturally into the colors of the surrounding cliffs. The name, Wupatki, comes from the Hopi language and is often translated as tall house. The title is fitting. Rising several stories above the desert floor, the structure dominates the landscape without appearing to conquer it. Carefully fitted blocks of red sandstone create walls that have endured for nearly 1,000 years. Doorways, windows, storage rooms, courtyards, and elevated living spaces reveal a community that balanced practicality with thoughtful design. From the highest rooms, the horizon stretches in every direction, offering views that seem almost limitless. Archaeological evidence indicates that Wupatki reached its greatest prominence during the 12th century AD. At its height, it may have housed more than 100 people, while surrounding settlements formed part of a broader regional network. Yet, the story of Wupatki cannot be understood without looking toward the volcanoes that dominate the distant skyline. Around AD 1064 or 1065, Sunset Crater erupted only a short distance away. The eruption transformed the surrounding landscape, covering nearby ground with layers of volcanic ash and cinders. At first glance, such an event might appear entirely destructive. Surprisingly, archaeological evidence suggests that the eruption may have improved agricultural conditions in some areas. The loose volcanic material helped retain moisture within the soil, allowing crops to flourish during subsequent generations. As farming opportunities expanded, populations from neighboring regions appear to have gathered around Wupatki, contributing to the settlement's rapid growth. This remarkable relationship between catastrophe and opportunity remains one of the site's most fascinating aspects. A volcanic eruption that might have driven communities away instead seems to have encouraged new patterns of settlement. The people who arrived brought diverse traditions, architectural styles, pottery, and cultural practices, transforming Wupatki into a vibrant meeting place where different communities interacted. The architecture reflects this diversity. Rooms were added over time, creating an intricate complex that appears to have grown organically rather than according to a single master plan. Storage spaces suggest the accumulation of agricultural surplus, while plazas indicate areas for communal activity. Among the site's most unusual features is a large circular structure believed to be a ball court. Ball courts are common farther south in ancient Mesoamerica, but are exceptionally rare this far north. Its presence has generated considerable interest among archaeologists because it points toward cultural connections extending across great distances. Trade routes linking the Southwest with regions far to the south are well documented through discoveries of copper bells, marine shells, colorful parrots, cacao residues, and other imported materials. Whether games played here resembled those practiced farther south remains uncertain, but the structure itself hints at an exchange of ideas that reached well beyond commerce alone. Another distinctive feature is a natural blowhole located near the pueblo. Air moves through underground lava tubes before emerging through an opening in the rock, creating a steady current of cool wind. Visitors today can still feel this invisible breath rising unexpectedly from the earth. For modern observers, it is an interesting geological phenomenon. For ancient inhabitants, however, such a place may have carried symbolic significance. Many indigenous traditions regard openings in the earth as spiritually meaningful, places where the visible and invisible worlds briefly intersect. While archaeology cannot determine precisely how the blowhole was understood at Wupatki, its proximity to important structures invites thoughtful consideration. Like Casa Rinconada, Wupatki contains no surviving written records explaining its ceremonies, leadership, or daily routines. Archaeologists reconstruct its history through architecture, artifacts, environmental evidence, and the oral traditions preserved by descendant indigenous communities, whose cultural connections to this landscape remain deeply important. These traditions provide invaluable perspectives, while reminding researchers that the ancient Southwest cannot be understood through excavation alone. Naturally, Wupatki has also inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers have suggested that the settlement's location reflects sophisticated astronomical planning, with surrounding volcanic peaks and distant horizons serving as markers for solar or lunar events. Others believe the combination of the blowhole, the ball court, and the carefully positioned buildings points toward ceremonial practices whose complexity has yet to be fully recognized. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges that astronomical observations played meaningful roles in many ancestral Puebloan communities, particularly for agriculture and seasonal ceremonies, but it remains cautious about attributing every architectural feature to celestial design without stronger supporting evidence. Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounds the community's departure. By the early 13th century A.D., Wupatki was gradually abandoned. Archaeologists generally attribute this transition to a combination of prolonged drought, environmental pressures, changing trade relationships, and social reorganization across the Southwest. These explanations are supported by extensive climatic and archaeological evidence. Yet no single event appears to have emptied the settlement. Instead, the departure unfolded gradually, as families relocated and communities adapted to changing conditions elsewhere. Today, Wupatki stands remarkably intact beneath the vast Arizona sky. Sunlight warms its red sandstone walls just as it did centuries ago. Ravens glide overhead, desert winds pass through empty doorways, and distant volcanic peaks remain fixed on the horizon, silent witnesses to generations of human resilience. Every room, every staircase, and every carefully placed stone reflects lives shaped by ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptation in an environment that demanded both patience and vision. Yet, despite everything archaeology has uncovered, the settlement still resists complete explanation. Why did certain traditions converge here with such unusual intensity? What conversations took place in its plazas as traders arrived from distant lands? What meanings did its people assign to the restless breath emerging from the earth beside their homes? The answers remain scattered among weathered walls, buried artifacts, and living traditions that continue to preserve fragments of a much larger story. And perhaps somewhere beneath the desert floor, another quiet discovery still waits, ready to deepen the mystery of Wupatki even further. Leaving behind the weathered stones of Wupatki, where desert winds still move through empty rooms and forgotten plazas, our journey travels far deeper into humanity's past. Across continents and thousands of years, another settlement waits beneath a quiet earthen mound. It has no towering walls, no royal palace, and no written chronicles to tell its story. Instead, it preserves something even rarer, a remarkably complete glimpse into everyday life at the dawn of civilization, where the ordinary itself becomes one of history's greatest mysteries. On the broad Konya plain of central Turkey, surrounded by distant mountains and open grasslands, Çatalhöyük rises gently from the landscape like a low hill, shaped more by memory than by nature. The plain stretches toward the horizon beneath an immense sky, where changing seasons still paint the fields with shifting shades of green and gold. At first glance, there's little to suggest that this quiet mound contains the remains of one of the world's oldest and most extraordinary settlements. Yet, beneath its layers of compacted earth, lie more than 1,000 years of continuous human occupation. Beginning around 7,400 BC, generations of people built their homes here, not side by side along streets, but directly against one another. The settlement grew into a dense maze of mud brick houses with almost no roads or alleyways separating them. Instead, daily life unfolded above the rooftops. Families climbed ladders to enter their homes through openings in the ceiling, walking across flat roofs that served as the community's streets. Smoke drifted upward from rooftop openings, while conversations, work, and movement filled an elevated world unlike almost any other settlement known from antiquity. This unusual design immediately raises questions. Why eliminate streets altogether? Archaeologists generally believe the closely packed buildings helped preserve valuable farmland, strengthened insulation, and provided a degree of protection from outside threats. Yet, there may have been social reasons as well. The rooftops created shared spaces where neighbors naturally encountered one another, suggesting a community organized around close cooperation rather than separation. Inside the homes, life appears both familiar and strangely different. Carefully plastered walls surrounded living spaces where people cooked, crafted tools, prepared food, and rested beside small hearths. The interiors were maintained with remarkable care. Floors were repeatedly resurfaced with fresh plaster, and walls were renewed so often that dozens of layers accumulated over centuries. Every rebuilding preserved traces of earlier generations hidden just beneath the surface. Perhaps the settlement's most compelling mystery lies beneath those immaculate floors. Many of the houses contained burials directly below the living spaces. Family members were placed beneath raised platforms where everyday activities continued above them. Children, adults, and elders often shared the same household across generations, even after death. Rather than creating separate cemeteries, the people of Çatalhöyük chose to keep their ancestors physically close. What did this relationship between the living and the dead truly mean? Most archaeologists interpret these burials as expressions of family continuity and ancestor remembrance. The home itself may have represented far more than shelter. It could have served as the enduring center of identity, linking generations through shared space rather than distant memorials. Yet many details remain uncertain. Some individuals received elaborate grave goods, while others were buried with almost nothing. Certain skulls were carefully removed sometime after burial, coated with plaster, and apparently preserved for purposes that remain only partly understood. Similar practices appear elsewhere in the Neolithic Near East, suggesting traditions whose deeper meanings have long since faded. The walls of Çatalhöyük preserve another layer of mystery. Several houses contain remarkable murals painted with red ochre and other natural pigments. Some depict geometric designs, while others portray hunting scenes, large birds, wild cattle, and abstract compositions. Among the most debated discoveries is a wall painting that some researchers interpret as showing rows of houses beneath the twin peaks of a nearby volcano. If correct, it may represent one of humanity's earliest surviving landscape images. Yet, that interpretation remains debated. Other scholars argue the painting may symbolize ceremonial patterns, animal hides, or entirely different concepts unrelated to geography. Without written explanations from the artists themselves, certainty remains beyond reach. Equally striking are the installations built into many homes. Large cattle horns were mounted onto plastered walls, creating dramatic displays that must have carried powerful symbolic meaning. Sculpted reliefs of animals emerge from certain rooms, suggesting that wild creatures occupied an important place within the community's beliefs. Bulls, leopards, vultures, and other animals appear repeatedly throughout the settlement, yet their exact significance remains one of Çatalhöyük's enduring puzzles. Unlike later civilizations, no monumental temples dominate the settlement. Instead, ritual appears deeply woven into domestic life. Certain houses contain richer symbolic decoration than others, leading archaeologists to identify them as places where important ceremonies or family traditions may have taken place. Rather than separating sacred and ordinary spaces, Çatalhöyük seems to blend them together so completely that everyday life itself may have held profound spiritual meaning. Another aspect of the settlement continues to surprise researchers. Despite supporting a population that may have numbered several thousand people, there is little evidence for kings, palaces, royal tombs, or centralized political authority. Most houses share similar sizes and construction techniques, suggesting that extreme differences in wealth were less visible than in many later societies. Some archaeologists see this as evidence of a relatively egalitarian community where cooperation shaped daily life. Others caution that leadership can exist without monumental architecture, and that social influence may have been expressed in subtler ways that archaeology struggles to detect. Scientific analysis has also revealed unexpected sophistication. Residents cultivated crops, managed domesticated animals, crafted obsidian tools from volcanic glass, and participated in long-distance exchange networks extending across Anatolia and beyond. Exotic materials, including shells and rare stones, reached the settlement from distant regions, demonstrating that even these early farming communities were far from isolated. As with many extraordinary archaeological sites, more speculative interpretations continue to circulate. Some independent researchers propose that the repeated rebuilding of houses followed sacred principles linked to cosmology rather than simple practicality. Others wonder whether the settlement preserves memories inherited from even earlier societies living near the close of the last ice age. A few have suggested that certain artistic motifs encode astronomical observations or symbolic maps whose meanings have been lost over millennia. These ideas remain speculative, while mainstream archaeology continues to explain the site's development through gradual cultural evolution, environmental adaptation, and complex social traditions supported by extensive archaeological evidence. Eventually, around 6,200 BC, the settlement was gradually abandoned. There is no clear sign of invasion or sudden catastrophe. Instead, environmental changes, shifting agricultural practices, and evolving patterns of settlement appear to have encouraged people to move elsewhere. The buildings slowly collapsed, one generation covering another, until the entire community disappeared beneath layers of earth. Today, excavated houses emerge beneath protective shelters, their ancient walls revealing a world both familiar and deeply unfamiliar. Every room speaks of ordinary routines, preparing meals, raising children, repairing tools. Yet every floor also conceals ancestors, every wall preserves symbols whose meanings remain uncertain, and every rebuilt house hints at traditions extending across countless generations. Standing above the quiet mound, it becomes clear that Çatalhöyük is not mysterious because it hides grand treasures or lost empires. Its mystery lies in something far more subtle. It reveals a society that flourished long before written history, yet challenges nearly every assumption about how early communities organized themselves, remembered their dead, and understood the world around them. And beneath the layers that still remain unexcavated, another forgotten household may yet preserve a clue capable of transforming our understanding of humanity's earliest experiments in living together. From the layered homes of Çatalhöyük, where every generation built upon the memories of those who came before, our journey now crosses oceans to the mist-covered mountains of northern South America. Here, the mystery is not hidden beneath the floors of ancient houses, but carved directly into stone. Silent figures stand watch across green hillsides, their expressions unchanged for centuries, guarding secrets that no written record has ever fully revealed. San Agustín Archaeological Park lies in the upper Magdalena River Valley of present-day Colombia, where rolling mountains disappear beneath drifting clouds and dense forests blanket the slopes. The air is cool, damp, and filled with the sounds of flowing streams and distant birds. Mist often settles across the landscape at dawn, softening the outlines of hills that have witnessed countless generations. Scattered throughout this remarkable region are hundreds of monumental stone sculptures unlike any others in the Americas. Some figures stand taller than a person, while others remain partially hidden beneath trees or sheltered inside ancient burial mounds. Their faces are striking. Wide eyes stare into the distance. Powerful jaws, sharp fangs, and intricate headdresses give many of the statues an appearance that is at once human and otherworldly. Some seem calm and protective. Others appear almost intimidating, as though guarding an invisible boundary between worlds. Each sculpture was carved from volcanic stone with extraordinary care, yet none bears an inscription explaining its purpose. The civilization responsible for these monuments flourished roughly between 100 BC and AD 800, although human occupation in the surrounding region stretches much further into the past. Unlike civilizations that left extensive written records, the people of San Agustín remain largely anonymous. Archaeologists reconstruct their history through monumental sculpture, burial sites, ceramics, tools, and the landscape itself. Every excavation adds another fragment to the story, yet the larger picture continues to resist complete understanding. The park contains numerous ceremonial sites connected by ancient pathways crossing hills and valleys. Many sculptures were placed near tombs built beneath earthen mounds, suggesting a close relationship between the monuments and funerary practices. Within these tombs, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of individuals accompanied by pottery, ornaments, and carefully arranged offerings. The statues appear to stand as guardians over the dead, though whether they represent ancestors, spiritual beings, mythical heroes, or something entirely different remains uncertain. One of the most fascinating aspects of San Agustín is the remarkable diversity of its sculptures. Some figures combine human and animal features, merging jaguars, birds, snakes, frogs, and monkeys into powerful symbolic forms. Others hold ceremonial staffs or weapons, while a few cradle smaller human figures in their arms. These combinations have led many archaeologists to interpret the statues as representations of transformation, reflecting religious beliefs in which humans and animals shared deep spiritual connections. Throughout indigenous traditions across the Americas, animals often symbolize strength, wisdom, fertility, or passage between different realms of existence. The sculptures may preserve echoes of such beliefs, although their precise meanings remain beyond certainty. Particularly intriguing are the monumental fountains and ceremonial spaces discovered at sites such as lavapatas, where flowing water was carefully channeled through carved volcanic rock. Human faces, serpents, reptiles, and other figures emerge directly from the stone, interacting with the movement of water itself. Archaeologists generally interpret these spaces as important ritual locations where ceremonies connected to purification, fertility, or seasonal cycles may have taken place. Water has long carried sacred significance in many cultures, serving as both a practical necessity and a powerful spiritual symbol. Yet, many questions remain unanswered. Why were so many statues concentrated within this mountainous region? Did each sculpture commemorate a specific individual, or were they intended to represent timeless supernatural beings? How were these massive stones transported across rugged terrain without metal tools or wheeled vehicles? The craftsmanship demonstrates remarkable planning and organization, suggesting a society capable of coordinating large communal efforts over extended periods. As with many enigmatic archaeological sites, San Agustín has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers propose that the statues preserve fragments of an ancient symbolic language whose meanings have been completely forgotten. Others suggest that the repeated combinations of human and animal forms encode astronomical knowledge, sacred geography, or cosmological ideas that extended across multiple cultures in prehistoric South America. These theories remain speculative, while mainstream archaeology continues to emphasize religious symbolism, ancestor veneration, ceremonial practice, and social organization supported by excavated evidence. Another enduring mystery concerns the eventual disappearance of the culture that created these monuments. Archaeologists believe that social changes, shifting political structures, environmental pressures, and evolving settlement patterns gradually transformed the region after about AD 800. There is little evidence for a sudden collapse or catastrophic destruction. Instead, the tradition of carving monumental sculptures slowly came to an end, leaving behind hundreds of silent guardians whose creators faded into history without written testimony. Today, moss slowly spreads across weathered faces that have watched the seasons change for more than 1,000 years. Rain falls gently over ancient tombs, while clouds drift between the surrounding hills much as they always have. Visitors walk quiet paths where ceremonial processions may once have passed, surrounded by statues whose expressions remain as enigmatic as the day they were completed. Standing among these stone figures, it becomes difficult to separate archaeology from imagination. Every sculpture appears to carry a message, yet its language has been lost. Every burial hints at beliefs too complex to recover through artifacts alone. The people who shaped this remarkable landscape left behind monuments of extraordinary skill, but they also left behind enduring silence. And somewhere beneath the forests, beneath untouched mounds, or within statues not yet fully understood, another forgotten clue may still be waiting, ready to reveal whether these mysterious guardians were protecting only the dead or preserving secrets meant for a future that had not yet arrived. From the mist-covered hills of San Agustín, where silent stone guardians continue watching over forgotten tombs, our journey follows the spine of the Andes farther south. Here, the mystery is carried not only by stone, but by water. High among the mountains, where clouds drift through narrow valleys and ancient terraces cling to impossibly steep slopes, lies a place where engineering and spirituality appear to flow together with remarkable harmony. Even today, its waters move exactly as they did centuries ago, quietly asking questions that archaeology has yet to answer completely. Tipón rests in the Peruvian Andes, southeast of Cusco, surrounded by dramatic ridgelines and fertile valleys shaped by countless generations of cultivation. The mountain air is cool and crisp, while sunlight shifts constantly as clouds roll across the peaks. Terraces descend the hillsides in graceful layers, their stone retaining walls blending so naturally with the landscape that they seem less like constructions than extensions of the mountain itself. From a distance, the site possesses an almost tranquil elegance. Only as one approaches does its true complexity begin to emerge. Unlike many ancient ruins where silence suggests abandonment, Tipón feels remarkably alive. Crystal-clear water continues to travel through precisely carved channels, spilling gently from one terrace to another before disappearing into carefully designed drainage systems. The sound is constant but never overwhelming. Every stream, every cascade, and every basin appears to exist exactly where its builders intended, centuries after the last official caretakers departed. Most archaeologists believe Tipón reached its greatest development during the 15th century AD as part of the Inca Empire. The site is often associated with the reign of the Inca ruler Viracocha, although the exact circumstances of its construction remain uncertain. Some historical traditions suggest it served as a royal estate, while others interpret it as an important ceremonial and agricultural center where practical engineering blended seamlessly with sacred meaning. Without definitive contemporary records describing its original purpose, both possibilities remain subjects of careful discussion. What immediately distinguishes Tipón is its extraordinary hydraulic system. Water emerges from natural mountain springs before entering an intricate network of stone canals engineered with astonishing precision. The channels maintain remarkably consistent flow despite changes in elevation, distributing water evenly across terraces, fountains, ceremonial spaces, and cultivated fields. Modern engineers continue to study these systems with admiration, noting how effectively they regulate water without pumps, mechanical valves, or modern materials. The precision raises an obvious question. How did Inca engineers achieve such remarkable control using only carefully shaped stone, observation, and practical experience? Mainstream archaeology points to generations of accumulated knowledge developed through close observation of mountain environments. The Inca inherited earlier engineering traditions while refining them into highly sophisticated systems adapted to the challenges of the Andes. Their understanding of gravity, gradients, drainage, and water pressure allowed them to construct irrigation networks that remain functional centuries later. Tipón stands among the finest surviving examples of this achievement. Yet, water at Tipón appears to have served purposes extending beyond agriculture alone. Several fountains display striking symmetry, with streams emerging through carefully carved openings before flowing into polished basins. The water divides evenly into multiple channels, maintaining an almost perfect balance that seems both practical and symbolic. Archaeologists generally interpret these features as evidence that water occupied a central place within Inca ceremonial life. Across the Andes, springs, rivers, and mountain sources were often regarded as sacred, connected to powerful natural forces that sustained both crops and communities. Could these flowing waters have formed part of rituals now lost to history? The surrounding terraces contribute another layer to the mystery. Their construction demonstrates remarkable attention to environmental stability. Carefully arranged retaining walls support fertile soils while allowing excess moisture to drain away, reducing erosion across steep slopes. Different elevations also create subtle variations in temperature and humidity, allowing a wide range of crops to be cultivated efficiently. Some researchers believe sites like Tipón may have functioned partly as agricultural laboratories where different growing conditions could be carefully observed and managed. This interpretation fits well with what is known about Inca administration. Agriculture formed the foundation of imperial stability, and understanding local environments was essential for sustaining populations spread across diverse climates. Even so, the elegance of Tipón suggests that utility alone cannot explain every architectural decision. The stonework itself invites closer attention. Massive blocks fit together with extraordinary precision, many requiring no mortar whatsoever. Doorways, stairways, channels, and terraces align with remarkable consistency despite the irregular terrain. Like other Inca monuments, the builders adapted their architecture to the landscape, rather than forcing the landscape into rigid geometric patterns. The result feels less like domination over nature than cooperation with it. Several ceremonial spaces appear deliberately positioned to overlook valleys, distant peaks, and flowing water simultaneously. In Andean belief systems, mountains, known as apus, were often regarded as powerful living beings whose presence shaped both the physical and spiritual landscape. Water, emerging from mountain springs, carried profound symbolic importance, linking heaven, earth, and human life through an unbroken cycle. Without written explanations from the builders themselves, however, the deeper meaning of these relationships remains open to interpretation. As with many remarkable archaeological sites, Tipón has attracted speculative ideas alongside mainstream research. Some independent researchers argue that its hydraulic system reflects mathematical knowledge far exceeding what conventional history attributes to the Inca. Others suggest that the precise alignment of terraces, fountains, and surrounding mountains encodes astronomical observations, or sacred geometric principles, whose full significance has not yet been recognized. Certain visitors have even remarked upon the unusual atmosphere of the site, describing an almost meditative quality created by the constant movement of water through carefully ordered spaces. Such experiences are deeply personal and cannot serve as archaeological evidence, yet they help explain why Tipón continues to inspire both scientific investigation and quiet contemplation. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious. Researchers generally explain the site's sophistication through exceptional engineering, environmental adaptation, religious symbolism, and the remarkable organizational abilities of the Inca state. These interpretations are strongly supported by excavated evidence and by comparisons with other Inca settlements throughout the Andes. Nevertheless, the harmony achieved between architecture, water, and landscape continues to impress specialists from multiple disciplines. Another mystery concerns what existed here before the Inca expanded into the region. Some archaeological evidence suggests earlier cultures may have occupied portions of the surrounding valley long before imperial construction began. If so, the Inca may have incorporated older sacred places into their own architectural vision, a practice documented elsewhere within the empire. Determining exactly how much of Tipón predates Inca rule remains an ongoing challenge. When Spanish chroniclers encountered the Andes during the 16th century, many ceremonial traditions had already been disrupted, transformed, or deliberately suppressed. Countless explanations that might once have clarified Tipón's purpose disappeared alongside oral histories that were never recorded. What remains today is the architecture itself, a silent testimony whose meaning must be reconstructed carefully from scène, water, landscape, and surviving indigenous traditions. Walking through Tipón today, the experience feels remarkably timeless. Water still glides across polished channels with almost effortless precision. Terraces remain green during the growing season, while mountain winds carry the scent of wild grasses across ancient pathways. The engineering appears so natural that it is easy to forget every channel, every fountain, and every retaining wall required extraordinary planning and labor. As the mountain waters of Tipón continue their quiet descent through channels carved centuries ago, our journey returns to the high deserts of North America. Once again, we encounter a place where remarkable engineering blends with enduring silence. But here, the mystery is framed not by flowing springs or terraced mountainsides. Instead, it unfolds within sandstone walls, ceremonial chambers, and forgotten rooms built beside a winding river, where generations once gathered before gradually disappearing into history. Despite its familiar name, Aztec Ruins had no connection to the Aztec civilization of central Mexico. The name was given during the 19th century by early settlers who mistakenly believed the impressive stone structures had been built by the Aztecs. Modern archaeology has long corrected this misunderstanding. The site was constructed by the ancestral Puebloan people, descendants of the same cultural traditions associated with Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. Yet the misleading name remained, preserving a reminder of how easily assumptions can shape the stories we tell about the past. Located in present-day northwestern New Mexico near the Animas River, Aztec Ruins National Monument occupies a broad valley surrounded by mesas and distant mountains. Cottonwood trees line the riverbanks, while sandstone cliffs glow with warm shades of red and gold beneath the desert sun. At first glance, the settlement appears both orderly and immense. Hundreds of rooms surround spacious courtyards, interconnected by passageways that hint at a community carefully planned from the beginning. Construction began around the late 11th century AD, during a period when the influence of Chaco Canyon was beginning to extend across much of the northern southwest. Archaeological evidence suggests that Aztec Ruins became an important regional center after the decline of Chaco, inheriting many architectural traditions while developing its own distinctive identity. Massive masonry walls, carefully aligned buildings, ceremonial spaces, and extensive residential areas reveal a thriving settlement capable of supporting a substantial population. Walking through the site today, one immediately notices the remarkable precision of its construction. Multi-story buildings once rose around central plazas, their stone walls fitted with extraordinary care. Wooden beams supported upper floors, while storage rooms, living quarters, workshops, and ceremonial chambers formed an intricate architectural landscape. The scale alone suggests careful planning extending far beyond the needs of individual families. At the heart of the settlement lies one of its most fascinating structures, the Great Kiva. Carefully reconstructed using archaeological evidence, this enormous circular ceremonial chamber echoes many of the great kivas found in Chaco Canyon. Partially built below ground level, it contains masonry vaults, benches, fire pits, and a sipapu, a small opening symbolizing emergence and ancestral origins within Pueblo traditions. Descending into the chamber today, the surrounding walls create a profound sense of quiet. Even without ceremonies, the space seems designed to encourage reflection. What took place inside these walls remains one of the site's enduring mysteries. Most archaeologists agree that great kivas served as important ceremonial centers where communities gathered for rituals, seasonal observances, decision-making, and shared traditions. Yet no written records describe the ceremonies themselves. Every interpretation relies upon architecture, artifacts, environmental evidence, and the oral histories preserved by descendant Pueblo communities. These traditions offer invaluable cultural insight, while reminding us that many sacred practices remain intentionally private and should not be reduced to simple archaeological explanation. Beyond the ceremonial architecture, Aztec Ruins reveals evidence of an interconnected world. Excavations have uncovered finely crafted pottery, turquoise ornaments, shell jewelry, stone tools, and traces of trade extending across vast distances. Imported materials demonstrate that the settlement participated in regional exchange networks, linking numerous communities throughout the American Southwest. Rather than existing in isolation, Aztec ruins formed part of a larger cultural landscape connected through commerce, ceremony, kinship, and shared knowledge. One particularly intriguing feature is the site's relationship with astronomy. Several architectural alignments appear to correspond with solar events, including seasonal sunrises and sunsets. Similar observations have been documented at other ancestral Puebloan sites, where tracking the movement of the sun played an essential role in agriculture and ceremonial life. Mainstream archaeology generally interprets these alignments as practical and symbolic tools that helped communities organize seasonal activities while reinforcing cosmological beliefs. Yet, questions remain. Were these alignments limited to marking planting seasons and ceremonial calendars, or did they reflect a broader understanding of the heavens that has yet to be fully recognized? The architecture leaves room for thoughtful discussion without providing definitive answers. The surrounding landscape adds another layer of complexity. Ancient roads, irrigation systems, and nearby settlements suggest that Aztec ruins functioned within a carefully organized regional network. Some pathways appear highly practical, connecting communities and resources. Others seem to follow routes whose significance remains uncertain. Like the enigmatic roads extending from Chaco Canyon, they hint at patterns of movement shaped by more than simple transportation. As with many remarkable archaeological sites, speculative theories have emerged over time. Some independent researchers argue that the remarkable similarities between Aztec ruins and Chaco Canyon indicate the continuation of ceremonial traditions guided by highly specialized religious leaders whose influence extended across vast territories. Others suggest that architectural alignments, sacred geometry, and repeated construction patterns reflect knowledge passed through generations according to principles that archaeology has only begun to understand. There are even proposals that certain buildings functioned as sophisticated observatories where celestial events were recorded with remarkable precision. Mainstream archaeology accepts that astronomy formed an important component of ancestral Puebloan life, but remains cautious about assigning highly specialized astronomical purposes to every structure without stronger supporting evidence. Most researchers emphasize a balanced interpretation in which ceremonial practice, community organization, environmental adaptation, and practical engineering worked together within a deeply interconnected worldview. Another mystery concerns the settlement's eventual decline. By the late 13th century AD, Aztec ruins was gradually abandoned. Archaeologists point toward prolonged drought, shifting environmental conditions, changing trade networks, and broader social transformations affecting the northern Southwest. Rather than a sudden collapse, evidence suggests a gradual movement of populations toward other regions, where descendant Pueblo communities continue to develop rich cultural traditions that endure today. The departure appears deliberate rather than chaotic. Valuable objects were removed, structures were left standing, and no widespread signs of violent destruction dominate the archaeological record. It seems the people chose to leave, carrying their knowledge, beliefs, and traditions elsewhere, while allowing the settlement to return slowly to silence. Today, sunlight filters through ancient doorways exactly as it did centuries ago. Ravens circle above weathered walls, while desert winds move quietly across empty plazas. The reconstructed Great Kiva rests at the center of the site like a memory preserved in stone, inviting visitors not merely to observe its architecture, but to appreciate the remarkable civilization capable of creating it. Standing among these carefully fitted sandstone walls, one senses that the greatest mystery is not simply why the settlement was abandoned. It is how an entire network of communities maintained such extraordinary cultural continuity across generations without leaving written histories to explain their achievements. Every room hints at conversations now forever lost. Every ceremonial chamber suggests rituals whose meanings remain only partially visible through archaeology. Every carefully aligned wall reminds us that knowledge can endure long after language disappears. And perhaps somewhere beneath an unexcavated courtyard, behind another sealed room, or within the subtle geometry of the buildings themselves, another forgotten clue still waits, one capable of revealing not only how the people of Aztec ruins lived, but how they understood their place within a landscape where earth, sky, memory, and ceremony were inseparable parts of the same enduring mystery. As the sandstone walls of Aztec ruins fade into the distance, our journey crosses another ocean to a landscape where mystery takes a quieter form. There are no towering temples, sprawling cities, or carefully engineered canals here. Instead, an open field, rolling hills, and a silent ring of ancient stones have challenged human understanding for thousands of years. Sometimes, the greatest archaeological puzzles are not hidden beneath the earth. They stand in plain sight, patiently waiting beneath the changing sky. High in England's Peak District, surrounded by limestone hills and broad stretches of open countryside, lies Arbor Low. The landscape is gentle rather than dramatic. Grasses ripple beneath persistent winds, sheep graze across the fields, and clouds cast slow-moving shadows over the earthworks. It is a place where silence seems almost permanent. Only as one approaches does the monument gradually reveal itself, a vast circular enclosure surrounded by a deep ditch and an outer embankment, enclosing dozens of enormous limestone blocks scattered across the ground. Unlike Stonehenge, whose upright stones immediately command attention, the stones of Arbor Low lie flat. Nearly every one has fallen, resting where gravity claimed them long ago. Whether they originally stood upright before collapsing through time, or were intentionally laid down at some later stage, remains uncertain. Their massive size alone suggests extraordinary effort. Each block weighs several tons, transported from nearby limestone outcrops by people who possessed neither metal tools nor wheeled vehicles. The monument dates to roughly 2500 BC, placing it within Britain's late Neolithic period, a time when communities across the islands were constructing monumental ceremonial landscapes. Although often compared to Stonehenge because of its circular arrangement, Arbor Low possesses its own distinctive character. Measuring nearly 90 meters across, the enclosed area contains approximately 50 large limestone blocks arranged in an oval formation. 2 entrance causeways interrupt the surrounding ditch, while an additional earthen mound, known as Gib Hill, rises nearby, adding another layer of archaeological complexity. Standing within the enclosure, it is difficult to escape the feeling that every element was carefully planned. The ditch lies inside the outer bank rather than outside it, an arrangement that offers little defensive advantage. This immediately suggests that protection was never the monument's primary purpose. Archaeologists generally interpret Arbor Low as a ceremonial or ritual center, part of a broader sacred landscape where gatherings, seasonal observances, and communal activities may have taken place. Yet, the exact nature of those gatherings remains one of its greatest mysteries. No written records survive from Neolithic Britain. The builders left behind no inscriptions explaining their intentions, no legends carved into stone, and no names attached to the monument. Archaeologists must instead rely upon excavation, environmental evidence, comparisons with similar sites, and careful interpretation of the surrounding landscape. Excavations have uncovered fragments of pottery, worked flint, animal bones, and traces of burning within and around the enclosure. These discoveries indicate repeated human activity across generations, suggesting that Arbor Low remained an important place long after its initial construction. Some evidence points toward feasting, while other finds hint at ceremonial practices involving fire and carefully deposited offerings. The nearby mound of Gib Hill adds further intrigue. Archaeological investigations suggest that it may predate the stone circle itself, with evidence indicating several phases of construction and reuse. Burials discovered within the mound reveal that the surrounding landscape continued to hold significance over long periods, perhaps evolving alongside changing beliefs and traditions. One particularly fascinating aspect of Arbor Low is its relationship with the wider landscape. The monument occupies one of the highest points in the surrounding countryside, offering broad views across the Peak District. Nearby prehistoric sites, ancient trackways, and burial monuments create the impression that Arbor Low formed part of an interconnected ceremonial network rather than existing in isolation. For the people who built it, the monument may have served as both a destination and a point of orientation within a sacred geography extending far beyond the visible horizon. Researchers have long examined whether the stones align with important celestial events. Some studies suggest possible connections between certain entrances and the rising or setting sun during significant points of the year, while others propose alignments involving the moon's more complex cycles. Such possibilities are not unusual for Neolithic monuments, many of which display relationships with seasonal changes essential for agriculture and ceremonial life. Mainstream archaeology approaches these alignments with careful restraint. While acknowledging that solar and lunar observations likely held cultural importance, researchers also recognize that many apparent alignments can emerge by chance. Determining intentional design requires substantial supporting evidence, and Arbor Low continues to invite thoughtful debate rather than definitive conclusions. The fallen stones themselves remain another enduring puzzle. Were they toppled by natural processes over thousands of years? Did later communities deliberately lay them down during changing religious traditions? Or were some perhaps never intended to stand as vertically as modern visitors imagine? Excavation has provided clues, but no universally accepted answer. Every stone seems to preserve its own unanswered question. Like many prehistoric monuments, Arbor Low has attracted speculative interpretations alongside archaeological research. Some independent researchers argue that its circular design reflects sophisticated geometric knowledge shared across Neolithic Europe. Others suggest the monument occupies a place chosen for subtle natural features, perhaps geological formations, underground water sources, or characteristics of the surrounding landscape that ancient builders regarded as spiritually significant. There are also suggestions that Arbor Low formed part of a ceremonial pilgrimage route linking multiple monuments across the Peak District, creating a ritual landscape experienced through movement rather than individual destinations. Although evidence increasingly supports the existence of interconnected prehistoric landscapes throughout Britain, the precise role Arbor Low played within them remains uncertain. Local folklore has naturally contributed its own layer of mystery. Over centuries, stories emerged describing unusual occurrences around the stones, mysterious gatherings beneath moonlit skies, and traditions warning against disturbing the monument. Such tales cannot be treated as historical evidence, yet they reveal how deeply the site has continued to shape the imagination long after its builders vanished from memory. Unlike monuments later transformed by conquest or extensive rebuilding, Arbor Low has remained remarkably untouched. The passing centuries altered its appearance through weather, vegetation, and changing land use, but the essential form of the enclosure still reflects decisions made nearly 4,500 years ago. Every season leaves new traces while preserving older ones beneath the soil. Today, visitors often find the site enveloped in profound quiet. Wind moves across the limestone plateau, birds drift overhead, and the fallen stones cast long shadows as the sun slowly crosses the sky. there are no towering walls separating the monument from the surrounding countryside. Instead, the landscape itself becomes part of the experience, encouraging reflection rather than certainty. Standing within the circle, one begins to understand why Arbor Low continues to fascinate archaeologists and historians alike. It offers remarkably little explanation while revealing extraordinary effort. Hundreds of people invested immense labor into shaping a place whose purpose cannot be fully reconstructed. Every ditch, every stone, every carefully chosen viewpoint suggests intention, yet the meaning behind that intention remains just beyond reach. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why Arbor Low was built, but how a place so outwardly simple continues to resist complete understanding after centuries of careful study. Beneath the grass lie countless fragments still waiting to be uncovered, while above them the ancient stones remain silent beneath the same sky their builders once observed. And somewhere between earth, horizon, and memory, another forgotten clue may still endure, quietly waiting for the moment when the landscape is finally ready to reveal one more piece of its enduring secret. From the quiet circle of Arbor Low, where fallen stones still mark an ancient gathering place beneath England's changing skies, our journey now follows the winds northward across the sea. The landscape becomes harsher, shaped by relentless waves, salt-laden air, and towering cliffs. Here, on the southern tip of Scotland's Shetland Islands, lies a place unlike almost any other archaeological site in Europe. Instead of preserving a single civilization, it contains thousands of years of uninterrupted human presence, each generation building directly upon the lives of those who came before. Jarlshof rests beside the rugged coastline overlooking Sumburgh Head, where the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean meet in a constant display of shifting tides and powerful winds. The air carries the scent of salt and seaweed, while seabirds circle endlessly above weathered cliffs. Storms regularly sweep across the coastline, reminding visitors that this landscape has always demanded resilience from those who chose to call it home. At first glance, Jarlshof appears almost like a maze of stone walls. Yet, these ruins do not belong to one village or one era. They represent a remarkable sequence of settlements stretching across nearly 4,000 years. Layer by layer, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of late Neolithic occupation, Bronze Age communities, Iron Age villages, Pictish settlements, Norse farmsteads, and finally, medieval structures. Few places in Europe reveal such an unbroken story of human adaptation within a single location. Ironically, the site itself remained hidden until nature decided otherwise. During the winter of 1899, violent storms eroded the nearby coastline, exposing ancient stone buildings buried beneath layers of earth. What first appeared to be isolated ruins gradually revealed itself as one of Britain's most extraordinary archaeological discoveries. The sea that had threatened the settlement for centuries had also preserved its memory. The earliest known inhabitants arrived during the late Neolithic period, establishing modest dwellings while the surrounding landscape looked remarkably different from today. As centuries passed, new generations rebuilt, expanded, and transformed the settlement without completely abandoning it. Rather than erasing the past, they often incorporated older structures into newer ones, creating a layered architectural record that resembles a history book written in stone. Among the most striking features are the Bronze Age houses, built with thick stone walls capable of resisting the island's unforgiving climate. Nearby stand the remains of Iron Age Borġs, massive circular stone towers unique to Scotland. Although many brooks now survive only as foundations, they were once imposing structures rising several stories high. Why were these towers constructed? Mainstream archaeology generally interprets brooks as multifunctional buildings combining domestic life, storage, social prestige, and perhaps defensive capability. Their thick, double walls and sophisticated engineering demonstrate remarkable skill, yet scholars continue to debate their primary purpose. Were they homes belonging to influential families? Community gathering places, symbols of authority visible across the surrounding landscape? The archaeological evidence supports several possibilities without fully resolving the question. Adjacent to the Borġ are wheelhouses, distinctive circular buildings whose interior stone partitions resemble the spokes of a wheel. These unusual structures remain among Jarlshof's most fascinating architectural mysteries. Archaeologists believed they served as domestic dwellings, yet the symbolic significance of their carefully organized interiors remains uncertain. Their repetitive design appears too deliberate to be entirely accidental. As centuries unfolded, the character of the settlement changed once again. During the early medieval period, Norse settlers arrived in the Shetland Islands, bringing with them new architectural styles, farming techniques, language, and cultural traditions. At Jarlshof, longhouses replaced earlier buildings, while Scandinavian influence gradually became woven into everyday life. Archaeological discoveries, including tools, weaving equipment, animal remains, gaming pieces, and imported objects, reveal a community connected not only to Scotland, but to the wider Viking world extending across the North Atlantic. Yet, even as cultures changed, the location itself remained remarkably constant. Why did people continue returning to this particular stretch of coastline generation after generation? Its position offered practical advantages. The nearby sea provided abundant fish and marine resources. Fertile grazing land supported livestock, and natural harbors connected the islands to distant trading networks. But practicality alone may not explain nearly 4 millennia of continuous occupation. Places often accumulate meaning through memory as much as geography. Every generation inherits landscapes shaped by those before them, adding new stories while preserving older ones, sometimes without fully understanding their origins. Excavations at Jarlshof have uncovered an astonishing variety of artifacts reflecting everyday life. Bone combs, spindle whorls, pottery, iron tools, bronze ornaments, carved stone objects, and fragments of textile production paint an intimate picture of ordinary existence across countless generations. Unlike monuments built primarily for ceremony, Jarlshof preserves the rhythms of daily life: cooking, weaving, repairing tools, raising animals, and sheltering from relentless northern storms. Yet, even within these ordinary routines, mysteries persist. Certain structures appear to have been deliberately modified in ways that cannot always be explained by simple, practical needs. Some buildings were rebuilt repeatedly, despite nearby alternatives. Others seem to have respected the locations of much older structures long after their original purpose had likely been forgotten. Archaeologists often suggest that inherited traditions or cultural memory influenced these decisions, but determining precisely how remains impossible. The relationship between Jarlshof and its surrounding landscape also invites deeper reflection. The settlement overlooked important maritime routes connecting northern Britain, Scandinavia, and the North Atlantic islands. Long before written navigation manuals, generations of sailors crossed these waters guided by stars, currents, winds, and accumulated experience. Jarlshof occupied a strategic position within this maritime world, participating in networks of trade and communication extending far beyond the visible horizon. Like many remarkable archaeological sites, Jarlshof has inspired more speculative interpretations alongside careful scholarship. Some independent researchers suggest that the repeated occupation of the site reflects an awareness of subtle environmental features now poorly understood. Perhaps freshwater sources, favorable magnetic conditions, or naturally sheltered geography that ancient communities regarded as uniquely significant. Others have proposed that the site's remarkable continuity reflects the preservation of sacred traditions extending across multiple cultures. Could Bronze Age builders, Iron Age communities, and Norse settlers all have recognized something meaningful about this place beyond its practical advantages? Archaeology cannot answer such questions directly. While cultural continuity can often be traced through material evidence, spiritual continuity is far more difficult to identify with certainty. Mainstream researchers remain cautious, emphasizing environmental suitability, strategic location, economic opportunity, and gradual cultural adaptation as the most reliable explanations for Jarlshof's long occupation. These interpretations are supported by extensive archaeological evidence. Yet they also acknowledge that human attachment to place frequently involves beliefs, traditions, and memories that rarely survive within the material record. The name Jarlshof itself is surprisingly modern. It was popularized by Sir Walter Scott in his 1822 novel The Pirate, inspired by the nearby ruins. The ancient inhabitants never knew their settlement by that name. Whatever they called it disappeared long before written history reached these distant islands. Today, visitors walk among walls constructed by people separated not merely by generations, but by entire civilizations. A few steps may carry someone across 1,000 years of history. Neolithic foundations rest beside Bronze Age dwellings. Iron Age towers stand near Viking longhouses. Medieval buildings overlook ruins already ancient when they were first constructed. The sea continues its endless work, wearing away the coastline grain by grain. The same winds that once filled Viking sails still sweep across abandoned houses whose fireplaces have long since grown cold. Every exposed stone reflects countless hands that shaped, repaired, and inhabited this extraordinary place. Perhaps Jarlshof's greatest mystery is not hidden within any single building or artifact, but within the remarkable continuity of human presence itself. Across 4,000 years of changing languages, beliefs, technologies, and cultures, people repeatedly chose this narrow strip of coastline as home. Something about this place endured while the world around it transformed beyond recognition. And somewhere beneath the remaining unexcavated layers, beneath walls not yet fully understood, or beneath the shifting sands still carried inland by northern storms, another forgotten chapter may continue waiting. Silent evidence from a people whose names have vanished, yet whose lives remain patiently preserved within the stones of Jarlshof. From the storm-battered shores of Jarlshof, where thousands of years of human history were layered one upon another beside the restless sea, our journey turns south toward the heart of the Mediterranean. Here, another coastline has preserved echoes of civilizations long vanished. But unlike the settlements of northern Europe, this place stands beneath warm sunlight, surrounded by limestone hills and quiet bays, where ancient sailors once crossed waters linking Africa, Europe, and the Near East. On a rocky ridge overlooking the sea lies a forgotten stronghold, whose silence conceals one of Malta's most enduring archaeological mysteries. Borġ in-Nadur occupies a commanding position near the southeastern coast of Malta, overlooking Marsaxlokk Bay and the surrounding countryside. The hill is modest in height, yet its location offers sweeping views across fertile plains and open water. Today, wild grasses sway gently among weathered limestone blocks, while the distant sound of waves rises from the shoreline below. The landscape feels peaceful, but its elevated position suggests that those who built here carefully considered both visibility and security. Unlike Malta's famous megalithic temples, whose monumental architecture immediately captures attention, Borġ in-Nadur presents a more complex story. The site contains the remains of both a prehistoric temple and a later fortified settlement, representing two very different chapters in the island's ancient past. Together, they reveal a period of profound cultural change that archaeologists are still striving to understand. The earliest phase belongs to Malta's remarkable temple period, when communities across the islands constructed some of the world's oldest freestanding stone monuments. The temple at Borġ in-Nadur dates to approximately 1500 BC, near the closing stages of this extraordinary architectural tradition. Although only portions survive today, its curved walls and carefully arranged limestone blocks clearly resemble other Maltese temple complexes, suggesting continuity with religious practices that had flourished for many centuries. Yet something was changing. Soon after the temple's construction, the site entered a new phase associated with what archaeologists call the Borġ in-Nadur culture, a Bronze Age society that emerged after the decline of the great temple-building tradition. During this period, the hilltop was enclosed by a substantial defensive wall built from enormous limestone blocks. In some places, these stones remain impressively preserved, forming one of the earliest known fortification systems on Malta. The appearance of defensive architecture immediately raises important questions. For centuries, Malta's earlier temple builders left little evidence of large fortifications. Why, then, did later communities invest such immense effort into constructing protective walls? Archaeologists generally suggest that changing social conditions, increasing competition for resources, or growing concerns about external threats may have encouraged greater emphasis on defense. The central Mediterranean was becoming increasingly connected through maritime travel, bringing opportunities for exchange alongside potential conflict. Even so, the exact reasons remain uncertain. The wall itself demonstrates considerable engineering skill. Massive limestone blocks were carefully fitted together without mortar, creating a formidable barrier overlooking the surrounding landscape. Although erosion and later activity have altered portions of the structure, enough survives to reveal the ambition of its builders. Standing beside these ancient stones today, it is easy to imagine how imposing the enclosure once appeared to approaching visitors arriving from the nearby coast. Excavations have uncovered pottery, stone tools, animal bones, and traces of domestic activity within the settlement, suggesting that Borġ in-Nadur functioned as more than a simple refuge during times of danger. Families likely lived, worked, and cultivated the surrounding land while remaining connected to maritime routes crossing the Mediterranean. The nearby bay would have provided access to fishing grounds and trade networks extending toward Sicily and beyond. One of the site's most fascinating aspects is its position within Malta's broader prehistoric landscape. The island contains numerous temple complexes, burial sites, and ancient settlements, many built within relatively short distances of one another. Rather than existing as isolated communities, these locations almost certainly formed part of interconnected cultural networks, shaped by shared beliefs, seasonal movement, and social relationships. Borġ in-Nadur occupies an important place within this wider story because it appears to bridge two very different eras: the fading world of the temple builders and the emerging Bronze Age communities that followed. What caused this transformation remains one of Malta's greatest archaeological puzzles. Mainstream archaeology points toward gradual cultural change rather than sudden catastrophe. Environmental pressures, evolving technologies, shifting trade relationships, and the arrival of new cultural influences may all have contributed to the disappearance of the temple-building tradition. Yet no single explanation has achieved universal acceptance. The transition appears surprisingly complex, unfolding over generations rather than through one dramatic event. Another enduring mystery concerns the temple itself. Although smaller than some of Malta's better-known ceremonial complexes, its architecture reflects traditions stretching back many centuries. Archaeologists generally believe these temples served important ritual functions, possibly connected to seasonal ceremonies, communal gatherings, or religious practices centered on fertility and the natural world. Without written records, however, the precise beliefs of their builders remain unknown. Every altar, chamber, and curved wall preserves intention without explanation. The surrounding landscape also invites closer attention. From the hilltop, broad views extend across fields toward the sea. Ancient communities often selected elevated locations not only for practical visibility, but also for symbolic significance. High places frequently became centers of ceremony, observation, and identity. Whether Borġ in-Nadur's commanding position carried similar spiritual importance remains an open question. As with many enigmatic archaeological sites, speculative interpretations have emerged alongside careful scientific research. Some independent researchers argue that Malta's prehistoric temples and fortified settlements preserve evidence of sophisticated maritime societies whose influence extended much farther across the Mediterranean than traditionally believed. Others suggest that the unusual architectural continuity between ceremonial and defensive structures reflects sacred knowledge inherited across generations, adapting to changing social circumstances without completely abandoning older beliefs. There are also proposals that certain temple orientations correspond to astronomical events, including solstices or prominent stars. Similar alignments have been documented at several prehistoric monuments throughout Europe, making such possibilities worthy of careful investigation. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges that celestial observation likely played some role in prehistoric ritual life, but remains cautious about attributing precise astronomical purposes to every architectural feature without compelling evidence. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in what survives, but in what has disappeared. Many structures at Borġ in-Nadur have suffered from centuries of weathering, stone reuse, and natural erosion. Countless artifacts undoubtedly remain buried beneath the surrounding soil, while others may have vanished forever. Every excavation uncovers new information, yet each discovery also reveals how much has already been lost to time. Walking through the ruins today, the contrast between permanence and disappearance becomes impossible to ignore. Massive limestone blocks still rest where ancient builders placed them over 3,000 years ago, while the people who shaped them left behind no written names, no recorded legends, and no direct explanation of their world. The sea remains visible from the hill exactly as it was for Bronze Age sailors, reflecting sunlight across waters that connected distant civilizations long before recorded history. The quiet atmosphere of Borġ in-Nadur encourages patience rather than certainty. Its temple hints at forgotten ceremonies. Its defensive walls suggest changing fears. Its location speaks of trade, communication, and adaptation within one of the ancient world's most important crossroads. Yet every answer uncovered by archaeology seems to reveal another layer of uncertainty waiting beneath it. Perhaps that is what makes Borġ in-Nadur so compelling. It captures a civilization in transition, preserving the moment when familiar traditions gave way to unfamiliar futures. Somewhere beneath its weathered stones, beneath unexcavated foundations, or hidden within fragments of pottery still resting beneath the earth, another forgotten clue may remain, one capable of explaining why an island once known for building temples suddenly chose to surround itself with walls, and what unseen forces quietly reshaped the course of its ancient history. From the limestone heights of Borġ in-Nadur, where ancient temples gradually gave way to fortified walls overlooking the Mediterranean, our journey now crosses the Atlantic to another rugged frontier shaped by mountains, trade, and shifting civilizations. Here, high in the dry valleys of northwestern Argentina, an ancient fortress watches over a landscape painted in shades of red, gold, and violet. It is a place where stone terraces climb steep hillsides, where powerful empires once met older traditions, and where every path seems to disappear into the silence of the Andes. Pucará de Tilcara rises above the Quebrada de Humahuaca, a dramatic mountain valley carved over millions of years by the Rio Grande. The surrounding landscape is unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Layered rock formations glow beneath the changing light, revealing bands of crimson, ochre, green, and purple that shift with every passing hour. Dry mountain winds sweep across the slopes, carrying the scent of cactus and wild grasses, while distant peaks stand watch over one of South America's oldest inhabited corridors. Perched on a strategic hill overlooking the valley, the ruins command an expansive view in every direction. Even today, anyone approaching through the narrow gorge becomes visible long before reaching the settlement. It is immediately clear why this location was chosen. From here, ancient inhabitants could monitor movement along the valley, protect valuable resources, and maintain communication with neighboring communities scattered throughout the Andes. The word Pucará comes from the Quechua language and is generally translated as fortress. Yet the site was far more than a military outpost. Archaeological evidence suggests that Pucará de Tilcara developed around the 12th century AD, built primarily by people associated with the Omaguaca culture. Long before the arrival of the Inca Empire, this thriving community had established itself as an important regional center, balancing agriculture, trade, craftsmanship, and defense within one carefully planned settlement. Walking through the reconstructed sections today, the organization of the site becomes strikingly apparent. Hundreds of stone buildings occupy terraces carved directly into the hillside. Narrow passageways weave between homes, storage structures, workshops, and open communal spaces. Thick stone walls define neighborhoods that once supported a substantial population, while carefully engineered terraces transformed steep slopes into productive farmland, capable of sustaining life in a demanding environment. Like many mountain settlements throughout the Andes, every architectural decision reflects an intimate understanding of the surrounding landscape. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of cultivated maize, potatoes, quinoa, and other crops adapted to high-altitude conditions. Storage facilities known as kolkas helped preserve food supplies against unpredictable weather and seasonal shortages. Stone tools, ceramics, weaving implements, and metal objects reveal a society whose daily life depended upon remarkable skill, cooperation, and careful planning. Yet, beyond these practical achievements, deeper mysteries begin to emerge. The settlement occupies a crucial position along ancient trade routes connecting the central Andes with distant regions to the north and south. Caravans of llamas likely carried salt, textiles, metals, pottery, medicinal plants, and other valuable goods across enormous distances. Pucará de Tilcara functioned not merely as a fortress, but as a crossroads where cultures, languages, technologies, and beliefs converged. How much knowledge traveled alongside these goods? Trade rarely carries objects alone. It also transports stories, religious traditions, artistic styles, and new ways of understanding the world. The archaeological record reveals influences arriving from multiple directions, yet reconstructing those human exchanges remains one of the site's greatest challenges. During the 15th century AD, the Inca Empire expanded into the region, incorporating Pucará de Tilcara into its growing administrative network. Rather than abandoning the existing settlement, the Inca adapted it to fit imperial needs. New architectural elements appeared, administrative functions expanded, and sections of the famous Inca road system strengthened the valley's importance within a continent-wide network of communication. This blending of local traditions with imperial organization creates another fascinating layer of complexity. To what extent did the original inhabitants preserve their own customs after becoming part of the Inca state? Archaeologists generally conclude that local traditions continued alongside imperial administration, rather than disappearing entirely. Pottery styles, burial practices, and aspects of daily life suggest remarkable cultural continuity despite political transformation. Yet the precise balance between adaptation and resistance remains difficult to determine. Excavations have revealed carefully constructed burial areas containing human remains accompanied by pottery, ornaments, tools, and personal belongings. These discoveries provide valuable insight into social organization and ritual practice, while also raising enduring questions about belief and identity. Certain burials appear more elaborate than others, suggesting differences in social status or ceremonial significance, although the exact meanings remain uncertain. The surrounding mountains themselves may also have played an important role within the community's spiritual landscape. Throughout the Andes, prominent peaks have long been regarded as sacred beings known as apus, living mountains associated with protection, fertility, weather, and ancestral presence. While direct evidence linking specific ceremonies at Pucará de Tilcara to surrounding peaks remains limited, archaeologists recognize that many Andean societies understood the natural landscape not as separate from human life, but as an active participant within it. Standing atop the settlement today, the relationship between architecture and landscape feels unmistakable. Every terrace follows the contours of the mountain. Every wall seems positioned with careful awareness of the valley below. The settlement appears less imposed upon the hillside than woven into it. Like many ancient sites, Pucará de Tilcara has also inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers suggest that the layout reflects astronomical principles extending beyond practical planning. Certain alignments have been proposed to correspond with solar events or seasonal observations important for agriculture and ceremony. Others argue that the fortress formed part of a broader network of sacred mountain sites connected through ritual pathways whose significance has not yet been fully understood. Mainstream archaeology remains measured in its conclusions. Researchers acknowledge that astronomical observation undoubtedly played an important role in many Andean cultures, particularly for regulating agricultural calendars and ceremonial cycles. However, they emphasize that current evidence supports interpretations grounded primarily in strategic planning, environmental adaptation, regional trade, and cultural development rather than highly specialized astronomical design. Another mystery surrounds the site's final years. The arrival of Spanish expeditions during the 16th century profoundly disrupted life throughout the Andes. Indigenous communities faced disease, warfare, forced labor, and sweeping political transformation. Pucará de Tilcara was gradually abandoned as these changes reshaped the region. Yet, much like other archaeological sites explored throughout this journey, there is no single dramatic ending preserved within its stones. Instead, the settlement slowly entered silence, while its surviving descendants carried their traditions into a rapidly changing world. Centuries later, archaeological restoration has revealed portions of the settlement, allowing visitors to experience something of its original scale. Carefully reconstructed walls outline neighborhoods that once echoed with conversation, weaving, food preparation, and the movement of traders arriving from distant valleys. Cacti now grow between ancient stones, while condors occasionally circle high above the surrounding cliffs, just as they likely did when the settlement was still alive. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Pucará de Tilcara lies in its remarkable ability to preserve multiple histories at once. It is simultaneously a fortress, a trading center, an agricultural community, a ceremonial landscape, and a place where local traditions encountered one of the largest empires ever to emerge in the Americas. Every layer reveals adaptation without complete replacement, continuity without perfect stability. Standing upon its highest terraces, overlooking the winding valley below, one begins to appreciate how easily the past can become intertwined with the landscape itself. The mountains remember every caravan that passed beneath them. The winds still follow ancient routes through the gorge. The stone walls continue marking paths once walked by countless generations whose names have long since disappeared. And somewhere beneath those terraces, within unexcavated rooms, forgotten storage chambers, or burial sites still resting beneath the Andean soil, another quiet discovery may yet remain, waiting to reveal not only how the people of Pucará de Tilcara defended their world, but how they understood the invisible connections between mountain, memory, and the enduring passage of time. From the windswept terraces of Pucará de Tilcara, where ancient stone walls still overlook the vast valleys of the Andes, our journey now returns across the Atlantic to the quiet countryside of northern Spain. Here, the mystery is not hidden atop a mountain fortress or buried beneath a ceremonial mound. Instead, it lies beneath fertile fields, where fragments of columns, weathered foundations, and forgotten roads mark the remains of a once thriving Roman city whose true identity has never been completely recovered. Los Bañales rests in the Aragon region of northeastern Spain, surrounded by gentle hills, cultivated farmland, and broad open skies. At first glance, the landscape appears peaceful and familiar. Vineyards, grain fields, and scattered olive trees stretch toward the horizon, interrupted only by clusters of pale limestone rising from the earth. Yet, beneath this quiet countryside lies the outline of an important settlement that flourished nearly 2,000 years ago before fading so completely that even its original name remains uncertain. Archaeologists generally date the city's greatest period of prosperity to the 1st and 2nd centuries A.D., when the Roman Empire connected vast territories through roads, commerce, and carefully planned urban centers. Los Bañales occupied a strategic position near important communication routes linking the Ebro Valley with the Pyrenees. Merchants, travelers, soldiers, and local communities likely passed through the settlement every day, transforming it into a lively center of trade and administration. Walking among the ruins today, traces of that forgotten world slowly emerge. Massive stone foundations outline public buildings, while fragments of elegant columns suggest structures that once dominated the skyline. Excavations have revealed sections of streets, residential areas, workshops, and a sophisticated hydraulic system that supplied fresh water to the growing settlement. Although time has reduced much of the city to scattered remains, its careful planning is still visible beneath the surrounding fields. Perhaps the most striking feature is the surviving Roman aqueduct. Unlike towering aqueducts that stretch dramatically across valleys, the remains at Los Bañales consist of monumental stone pillars that once supported water channels crossing uneven terrain. These carefully constructed supports reveal the remarkable engineering abilities of Roman builders, who understood how to maintain precise gradients across long distances using only simple surveying tools and extraordinary craftsmanship. Even in their incomplete state, the pillars stand as quiet reminders of a civilization capable of reshaping entire landscapes through engineering alone. Yet, despite these achievements, one fundamental mystery remains unanswered. What was this city actually called? Ancient texts mention several Roman settlements that may correspond to Los Bañales, including Tarraca and other possible candidates, but no definitive inscription has yet confirmed the city's identity. Archaeologists continue comparing historical records, inscriptions from nearby regions, and excavated evidence in hopes of resolving the question. Until then, one of the settlement's most basic details remains uncertain. Excavations have uncovered pottery, coins, inscriptions, tools, jewelry, and architectural fragments that paint a picture of prosperous urban life. Public baths, marketplaces, and domestic buildings suggest a community that embraced many aspects of Roman culture, while also preserving local traditions inherited from earlier Iberian peoples. Like many provincial cities throughout the empire, Los Bañales was not merely a copy of Rome. It represented a meeting place where different cultures blended into something uniquely regional. Another intriguing aspect of the site is its gradual disappearance. Unlike cities destroyed by volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or dramatic invasions, Los Bañales appears to have declined slowly during the later centuries of the Roman Empire. Archaeologists point toward changing trade routes, economic transformation, political instability, and shifting population patterns as likely contributing factors. Rather than ending through sudden catastrophe, the city seems to have been quietly abandoned as its importance gradually diminished. Even so, questions remain. Why did a settlement with such impressive infrastructure lose its significance? Were environmental changes involved? Did nearby cities simply become more attractive centers of commerce? The archaeological evidence suggests several overlapping causes, yet no single explanation fully accounts for its decline. As with many forgotten Roman cities, speculative theories occasionally surround Los Bañales. Some independent researchers have suggested that undiscovered ceremonial complexes or administrative buildings still lie beneath the surrounding farmland, waiting to transform current interpretations of the site. Others wonder whether its unidentified ancient name conceals connections to historical events or regional power structures that have yet to be recognized. While such possibilities remain speculative, ongoing excavations continue revealing new structures almost every field season, reminding researchers that much of the city still lies hidden beneath the soil. Mainstream archaeology remains focused on the steadily growing body of evidence. Advances in aerial photography, ground-penetrating radar, and systematic excavation have revealed streets, neighborhoods, and public spaces previously unknown, allowing the settlement's layout to emerge with increasing clarity. Each discovery strengthens our understanding, while simultaneously exposing new questions that earlier generations could not have imagined. Today, the countryside around Los Bañales feels remarkably tranquil. Birds settle upon ancient columns, wild grasses grow between weathered foundations, and sunlight moves slowly across stones once polished by thousands of footsteps. Farmers continue cultivating fields that conceal entire neighborhoods beneath their surface, while archaeologists patiently uncover one layer after another, assembling fragments of a city whose full story remains incomplete. Perhaps that is what makes Los Bañales so quietly compelling. Its greatest mystery is not hidden within a single monument or extraordinary artifact, but within the silence surrounding an entire community that prospered, declined, and eventually slipped almost completely from historical memory. Every newly uncovered street reveals another unanswered question. Every inscription hints at names still missing from history, and every buried foundation suggests that somewhere beneath the fertile fields of Aragon, another forgotten piece of this vanished Roman city is still waiting to be found. From the forgotten streets of Los Bañales, where a Roman city gradually disappeared beneath fertile fields until even its ancient name faded from memory, our journey now turns toward an island whose prehistoric landscape still defies easy explanation. Rising from the rolling plains of northern Sardinia stands a monument built long before Roman legions ever crossed the Mediterranean. It is a place of towering stone, winding passages, and unanswered questions, a fortress to some, a sanctuary to others, and one of Europe's most enduring archaeological enigmas. Nuraghe Santu Antine dominates the countryside near the valley of the Nuraghes in northern Sardinia. Even from a distance, its silhouette commands attention. Massive basalt blocks rise in carefully balanced layers, forming a monumental stone tower surrounded by additional defensive walls and smaller structures. The surrounding fields are quiet today, interrupted only by grazing sheep, scattered olive trees, and distant mountain ridges. Yet, nearly 3,500 years ago, this landscape formed the heart of a civilization whose achievements continue to puzzle archaeologists. Constructed around the 16th century BC, during the Bronze Age, Santu Antine belongs to the remarkable Nuraghic civilization, a culture unique to Sardinia that built thousands of stone towers known as Nuraghes across the island. More than 7,000 of these structures are still known today, though many survive only as ruined foundations. Among them, Santu Antine stands as one of the largest, most sophisticated, and best-preserved examples ever discovered. Approaching the monument, its scale becomes immediately apparent. The central tower originally reached nearly 24 meters in height, making it one of the tallest prehistoric stone buildings in Europe. Even after centuries of weathering and partial collapse, its immense walls remain astonishingly intact. Enormous basalt blocks, some weighing several tons, fit together without mortar, relying entirely on careful shaping, balance, and remarkable engineering. The precision is so impressive that parts of the structure have endured for more than 3,000 years despite earthquakes, storms, and countless seasons of erosion. Stepping inside reveals an equally remarkable interior. Narrow corridors wind through thick walls, connecting chambers built one above another. Stone staircases spiral upward within the tower itself, allowing access to higher levels through passages concealed inside the massive masonry. Domed chambers constructed using corbelled stonework rise overhead, each layer gradually narrowing until the ceiling closes at its highest point. Standing beneath these carefully balanced vaults, it becomes difficult not to wonder how Bronze Age builders achieved such precision without iron tools, cranes, or written architectural plans. The purpose of Santu Antine remains one of the site's greatest mysteries. Mainstream archaeology generally agrees that Nuraghes served multiple functions, rather than a single, fixed purpose. Their commanding positions and thick defensive walls suggest that security played an important role. Elevated towers provided excellent visibility across surrounding territory, allowing inhabitants to monitor movement through nearby valleys. Yet, the complexity of Santu Antine extends far beyond what would be expected from a simple military fortification. Excavations have uncovered evidence of surrounding houses, courtyards, workshops, and storage areas, indicating that an entire community once flourished around the central tower. Pottery fragments, bronze objects, tools, and animal remains reveal everyday life unfolding within the shadow of this remarkable monument. Some archaeologists interpret Santu Antine as the residence of influential leaders who oversaw agricultural production, trade, and local governance. Others believe it functioned as a communal center where political authority, economic activity, and ceremonial life became closely intertwined. Trade formed an important part of the Nuraghic world. Sardinia possessed valuable mineral resources, including copper and lead, while archaeological discoveries reveal connections extending across the Mediterranean. Mycenaean pottery, imported goods, and shared artistic influences suggest that Nuraghic communities participated in extensive maritime exchange long before the rise of classical civilizations. Far from existing in isolation, Santu Antine belonged to a society actively engaged with distant cultures while preserving its own distinctive traditions. Yet one question continues to challenge researchers. Why did the Nuraghic civilization invest such enormous effort into constructing thousands of these towers across the island? If defense alone were the goal, the extraordinary variation in size, complexity, and location becomes difficult to explain. Some Nuraghs occupy commanding hilltops, while others stand within fertile plains or near important water sources. Their distribution suggests a far more complex social landscape than a simple network of fortresses. As with many prehistoric monuments, speculative theories have naturally followed. Some independent researchers argue that the towers served astronomical purposes, with windows and entrances carefully aligned to seasonal solar events or significant stars. Others propose that the internal chambers possessed acoustic properties designed for ritual ceremonies, creating resonant spaces where sound carried unusual symbolic significance. A few have even suggested that the widespread network of Nuraghes reflects a sophisticated system of communication stretching across Sardinia through carefully positioned lines of sight. Mainstream archaeology approaches these ideas cautiously. Researchers acknowledge that astronomical observations and ceremonial practices may well have played roles in Nuragic society, but current evidence supports a broader interpretation in which defense, political authority, community identity, storage, and ritual all contributed to the tower's importance. Rather than serving one exclusive purpose, Santu Antine may have embodied several functions simultaneously. Another enduring mystery concerns the eventual transformation of the Nuragic civilization itself. Beginning in the Late Bronze Age and continuing into the Iron Age, Sardinia experienced increasing contact with Phoenician traders and later with Carthaginian and Roman expansion. The great towers were not suddenly abandoned. Instead, many continued to be occupied, adapted, or incorporated into changing cultural landscapes. This gradual transition complicates efforts to define exactly when the Nuragic world truly came to an end. Today, sunlight pours through ancient doorways exactly as it did more than 3 millennia ago. Cool air drifts through narrow corridors carved within walls of solid stone, while birds circle above the weathered summit, where Bronze Age builders once stood surveying the surrounding countryside. Every staircase still invites exploration. Every chamber preserves an atmosphere of quiet permanence. The monument feels less like a ruin than a carefully folded memory waiting to be unfolded once again. Perhaps that is the enduring power of Nuraghe Santu Antine. It offers extraordinary engineering without written explanation, monumental ambition without named rulers, and architectural sophistication from a civilization that still remains partly hidden behind the passage of time. Each basalt block reflects knowledge accumulated over generations, yet the ideas that inspired such remarkable construction remain only partially understood. Somewhere within its silent corridors, beneath unexplored foundations, or among the thousands of other Nuraghs scattered across Sardinia, another forgotten clue may still be waiting, one capable of revealing why an island covered itself with stone towers whose greatest purpose continues to stand just beyond our reach. Leaving behind the towering stone corridors of Nuraghe Santu Antine, where an entire civilization expressed its identity through monumental architecture, our journey continues across the western Mediterranean to another island whose ancient past is written not only in stone walls, but in stone faces. Here, among quiet olive groves and rolling hills of southern Corsica, weathered figures have stood in silent observation for thousands of years. They possess no voices, no written names, and no certain purpose. Yet their carved eyes continue to meet the modern world with the same mysterious gaze they have held since the Bronze Age. Filitosa rests within a peaceful valley surrounded by low hills, cork oak forests, and scattered granite outcrops. The landscape feels timeless. Sunlight filters through ancient olive trees, cicadas fill the warm air with their constant rhythm, and smooth granite boulders emerge naturally from the earth as though shaped by the landscape itself. At first glance, the setting appears almost ordinary, but among these rocks stand some of Europe's most enigmatic prehistoric sculptures, towering stone statues carved with unmistakably human features. Discovered in the modern era during the 1940s and systematically excavated in the decades that followed, Filitosa quickly became recognized as one of Corsica's most important archaeological sites. Yet, unlike many prehistoric monuments defined by a single structure or settlement, Filitosa represents a complex landscape that evolved across many centuries. Stone circles, defensive walls, habitation areas, and monumental sculptures overlap one another, preserving evidence of changing cultures whose stories remain only partially understood. The most striking features are undoubtedly the statue menhirs. Carved from local granite, these upright stones depict stylized human figures unlike anything else in the Mediterranean. Their faces emerge with remarkable simplicity, yet undeniable personality. Deeply carved eyes stare outward beneath prominent brows. Long noses extend toward carefully defined chins. Some figures display broad shoulders and faint suggestions of arms, while others carry detailed carvings of swords, daggers, belts, or protective armor. These weapons immediately distinguish many of the statues from ordinary standing stones. Archaeologists generally date the sculptures to the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, with many created between approximately 1500 and 1200 BC. Their carved weapons suggest that they may commemorate warriors or individuals of particular social importance. Yet, beyond these observations, certainty quickly begins to disappear. Who were these stone figures meant to represent? One possibility is that they honored respected leaders whose memory communities wished to preserve across generations. Another interpretation suggests they marked sacred territory or ceremonial gathering places where important rituals unfolded beneath the open sky. Some researchers propose that the statues symbolized protective ancestors, silently watching over nearby settlements long after the people themselves had vanished. The archaeological evidence supports elements of each interpretation, while fully confirming none. Excavations throughout Filitosa have revealed successive phases of occupation stretching back to roughly 3,300 BC. Early farming communities established themselves among the granite hills, gradually constructing circular monuments, dwellings, and ceremonial spaces. Later, Bronze Age groups modified portions of the site, sometimes incorporating older structures into new architectural arrangements rather than abandoning them entirely. This pattern of continuity raises another fascinating question. Why did successive generations continue returning to exactly this location? Its fertile valley offered practical advantages for agriculture and livestock, while nearby streams provided reliable water. Yet, practical considerations alone may not explain why monuments were repeatedly reused, rebuilt, and transformed over many centuries. Ancient communities often developed profound attachments to landscapes shaped by ancestral memory. Places accumulated meaning through repeated occupation, becoming centers of identity as much as survival. One particularly intriguing discovery suggests that some of the statue menhirs were deliberately broken and later incorporated into defensive walls constructed by subsequent inhabitants. Archaeologists continue debating the significance of this practice. Was it simply a convenient use of available stone? Or did later communities intentionally dismantle monuments associated with earlier beliefs as political or religious traditions evolved? The answer remains uncertain. Such acts of reuse appear elsewhere throughout prehistoric Europe, where older sacred objects sometimes acquired entirely new meanings under changing societies. At Filitosa, these broken statues preserve evidence not only of creation, but of transformation, a reminder that ancient cultures continuously reinterpreted their own past. The broader cultural context adds further complexity. During the Bronze Age, Corsica occupied an important position within Mediterranean maritime networks, connecting Sardinia, mainland Europe, and the Italian peninsula. Similarities between certain Corsican artifacts and those discovered elsewhere suggest regular contact through trade and seafaring. Ideas, technologies, artistic traditions, and perhaps even populations themselves likely crossed these waters over countless generations. Some archaeologists have explored possible connections between Filitosa and the Nuraghic civilization of neighboring Sardinia. Shared architectural features, overlapping chronological periods, and comparable bronze artifacts indicate interaction between the islands, although the precise nature of those relationships remains under investigation. Whether these similarities reflect migration, trade, cultural exchange, or parallel development continues to be carefully studied. As with many prehistoric sites, Filitosa has inspired more speculative interpretations alongside mainstream research. Some independent researchers argue that the statue menhirs represent an unusually sophisticated symbolic language whose meanings have been lost. Others propose that their orientation within the landscape reflects astronomical observations tied to seasonal ceremonies or celestial events. A few have even suggested that the carved figures served as guardians positioned according to sacred principles understood only within the society that created them. Mainstream archaeology approaches these ideas with measured caution. While acknowledging that prehistoric monuments often possessed symbolic and ceremonial significance, researchers emphasize that current evidence most strongly supports interpretations grounded in ancestor veneration, territorial identity, evolving social organization, and ritual practice. The statues undoubtedly carried meaning far beyond decoration, but the exact nature of that meaning remains elusive. Walking through Filitosa today feels remarkably different from visiting monumental cities or towering temples. The sculptures stand quietly among trees and granite boulders, blending naturally into the landscape that has surrounded them for millennia. Their weathered surfaces bear the marks of wind, rain, and countless changing seasons. Moss softens their carved features, while shifting sunlight creates the illusion of subtle expressions that seem almost alive for a fleeting moment. Perhaps this quiet ambiguity explains why Filitosa continues to fascinate archaeologists and visitors alike. Its greatest mystery is not hidden beneath elaborate architecture or buried treasure, but within faces carved by hands whose names disappeared long before written history reached Corsica. Every statue preserves intention without explanation. Every broken fragment hints at forgotten beliefs. Every reused stone reflects generations struggling to define their relationship with those who came before them. And somewhere beneath the valley's untouched soil, among granite outcrops still concealing ancient foundations, or within another weathered figure yet to emerge from the earth, a single forgotten discovery may still remain, waiting to reveal why these silent guardians were first raised, whom they truly represented, and why they continue watching the landscape long after every voice that carved them has fallen silent. From the silent granite faces of Filitosa, where forgotten figures continue watching over the Corsican landscape without revealing the identities of those who carved them, our journey now travels far to the highlands of East Africa. Once again, we encounter stones that seem to speak without words. They rise from the earth not as walls or towers, but as slender monuments covered with mysterious symbols, carefully shaped pillars whose meaning has resisted generations of careful study. Here, in the quiet fields of Ethiopia, one of Africa's most intriguing archaeological puzzles continues to stand beneath an open sky. The Tiya Stelae are located on a broad plateau, where rolling grasslands stretch toward distant hills beneath vast skies filled with drifting clouds. The landscape feels calm and almost untouched. Gentle winds ripple through tall grasses, birds pass overhead, and scattered trees cast long afternoon shadows across the ground. At first, the standing stones appear almost modest in size. Yet, as one approaches, intricate carvings begin to emerge from their weathered surfaces, transforming simple pillars into silent records from a civilization whose voice has almost entirely disappeared. Tiya is the best-known site within a much larger group of megalithic monuments scattered across central Ethiopia. Archaeologists have documented dozens of similar stelae throughout the surrounding region, suggesting that the people responsible for them belong to a widespread cultural tradition rather than an isolated community. Even so, Tiya remains exceptional because of both the number of surviving monuments and the remarkable detail preserved upon many of them. Most researchers date the site to somewhere between the 10th and 15th centuries AD, although the precise chronology remains the subject of continuing investigation. Unlike ancient civilizations that left written inscriptions or extensive historical records, the builders of the Tiya Stelae remain almost entirely anonymous. Their language, political organization, religious beliefs, and social structure survive only through archaeology, oral traditions, and the enduring presence of the monuments themselves. The carved symbols immediately capture attention. Many of the stelae display long swords engraved along their length, often accompanied by geometric designs, circles, crossed lines, and curious shapes that resemble plant forms or abstract emblems. Some stones include patterns interpreted as belts or ceremonial objects, while others feature motifs whose purpose remains completely unknown. Every carving appears deliberate, suggesting that each monument communicated information easily understood by those who created it. Today, however, that symbolic language remains largely undeciphered. The sword carvings have inspired particular interest among archaeologists. One widely accepted interpretation suggests that many of the stelae served as grave markers commemorating important individuals, perhaps respected warriors or community leaders. Excavations beneath several monuments have uncovered human burials, strengthening the connection between the stones and funerary practices. Yet, even if the monuments marked graves, they clearly represented something more than simple memorials. Why decorate them with such distinctive symbols? Were the swords literal representations of status and achievement? Did they symbolize authority, protection, or spiritual beliefs connected with the afterlife? Could each combination of carvings have identified particular families, clans, or social roles within the community? Archaeologists continue exploring these possibilities, but no single interpretation explains every monument. The careful craftsmanship also raises important questions about the society that created them. Each stela required selecting suitable stone, transporting it across the landscape, carving intricate designs with precision, and finally raising the monument upright. Such work demanded organization, technical skill, and coordinated labor. These were not isolated efforts carried out casually. They reflect communities capable of planning substantial public projects while sharing common artistic traditions across considerable distances. The broader landscape surrounding Tiya deepens the mystery even further. Nearby archaeological sites reveal evidence of settlements, agriculture, and regional interaction extending across centuries. Ethiopia has long occupied a crossroads linking eastern Africa with the Red Sea, the Nile Valley, and the wider Horn of Africa. Trade routes carried ideas alongside goods, connecting distant communities through networks that evolved over generations. Yet, despite these broader connections, the culture responsible for the Tiya Stelae developed an artistic tradition unlike any other known in the region. One of archaeology's greatest challenges lies in understanding why this tradition eventually disappeared. The construction of carved stelae seems to have ended without leaving direct descendants who continued the practice in its original form. Whether changing political structures, evolving religious traditions, environmental pressures, or gradual cultural transformation contributed to its decline remains uncertain. Unlike civilizations brought to an abrupt end by conquest or natural disaster, the people of Tiya appear to have faded into history through more gradual processes that archaeology can only partially reconstruct. As with many enigmatic monuments, speculative theories have naturally emerged alongside scientific research. Some independent researchers suggest that the carved symbols represent an ancient writing system whose meaning has simply not yet been recognized. Others believe the monuments encoded astronomical knowledge, with specific carvings corresponding to celestial events observed throughout the year. A few have proposed that the stelae formed part of a sacred ceremonial landscape, extending far beyond the visible boundaries of the site, connecting communities through shared ritual traditions now lost to time. Mainstream archaeology approaches such ideas carefully. Researchers acknowledge that the monuments almost certainly possessed symbolic and ceremonial importance, but current evidence supports interpretations centered primarily on funerary practice, social identity, and regional cultural traditions. The carvings undoubtedly conveyed meaningful information, yet whether that information represented religious belief, political authority, genealogy, or something entirely different remains unresolved. Standing among the Tiya Stelae today, the silence becomes almost tangible. Each monument rises independently, separated from its neighbors yet clearly belonging to a common tradition. Their surfaces have been softened by centuries of wind and rain, but the carved swords and mysterious symbols remain surprisingly distinct. They seem less like decorations than messages addressed to an audience that no longer exists. Perhaps that is the most compelling aspect of Tiya. The stones are not hidden beneath the earth, concealed inside temples, or protected within tombs. They stand openly beneath the African sky, visible to anyone willing to pause and look closely. Yet, despite their accessibility, their deepest meaning continues to resist complete understanding. Every carved line reflects deliberate intention. Every engraved sword hints at forgotten identities. Every weathered pillar preserves a fragment of a culture whose stories were carried not through written chronicles, but through carefully shaped stone. And somewhere beyond the monuments that still stand today, beneath the surrounding fields or among undiscovered sites scattered across the Ethiopian highlands, another silent stela may yet remain, its symbols waiting patiently for the moment when they finally reveal a forgotten chapter of Africa's ancient past.